We interrupt this broadcast to bring you live at the Howard Stern book signing on 98.5 KOME.
Hey, everybody.
The helicopter says 13,000 people are here today.
First of all, I got to say something. This station really does kick ass. It's the first time I ever got to hear it. The music is incredibly good. I love this radio station.
I'll tell you the best thing about coming down to see Howard really isn't Howard. We hear him every day on the air. It's the chick. Right, guys?
Howard Stern, weekday mornings on New Rock 98.5 KOME.
It's Carson here with Bradley at 98.5 KOME. I want to give a quick thank you to some 22,000 Northern Californians who decided that KOME would be a day that they would choose to spend. I've never quite seen a campus like this. This is a very, very excellent campus.
It's the Acoustic Christmas show that is starting today. Cheryl Crow is doing the sound check right now. The keyboard player for the Black Rose.
Country club either, is it? This is Santa
What's going on? The president of my area broadcast legend, and a legend in my own mind. This is our first luncheon in 22 months, if you can tell. It's nice to be back here in the grass. It's nice to be back anywhere. When last we met, I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy 2020. You know how that turned out. One quick item of business, if I may. We're all got a little ticket. You've got your table number. If you would put that ticket on the table in front of you, the waiters and waitresses, our wait staff, can see who gets what, and it really speeds up the process of bringing you your lunch. I mean, we have never had this many people at a Legends function ever. So, give yourself a pat on the back. Our history. Everybody came to see Tom Hanks. All right. On behalf of the Legends, I really want to welcome all of you inductees and your friends and family for this afternoon. It's going to be a memorable afternoon, I know it. And I especially want to thank and welcome our master of ceremonies. Thank you for doing it. He'll be gracing you with his presence shortly. Mr. Stan Bunger. As we do at all of our luncheons, we take a few moments to remember friends who have left us since last we met. And it's a fairly long list, but it's only a partial list. This is a list of members of the Legends and or the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame who have passed since we last met. The rest of the list will do it December. Fred Zender, KTVU, died June 27th of this year. Jerry Lange, KGO and KBHK and KQED, April 2nd, 2021. Les Cranes, Kron, April 15th, 2021. Fred Kroc, one of our newscasters for KKHI, August 26th, last year. Jim Schock, who for years wrote all the headlines and all sorts of other things for the Legends, passed on August 20th, 2021. Bob March, rather. KTVU, August 6th, 2021. Ralph Barbieri, from the Hall of Fame. KNBR, August 3rd, 2021. Jane Morrison, KNBC and KNBR. Same station, different color. June 4th, 2021. John Hamilton from KPAT and KGO, May 26th of 2020. Bob Keeve of KLIV, a few months after he was named the radio station of the year, May 9th, 2020. Mel Sharp, Boyle and Sharp, yes. KGO, May 10th of 2020. And George Larson from Kron, December 16th, 2019. A moment, if you would. Thank you. Now, as they start coming around and seeing who gets what, we have our regular legends feature the historic radio newscast. Newscasters today, Mr. Don Sanchez, long of KGO, and Mr. Curtis Kim, a veteran of KNBR, KSRO, KCBS. In our look back today, gas was 19 cents a gallon. A new car was about $1,500. First class postage was 3 cents. And a penny postcard was a penny. Welcome to 1951. Gentlemen.
So many people, such history, that I think we need to do selfies.
Oh, you want me? That's a nice picture of it.
Okay, never mind, all right.
Give me up a lot of time. They said I was yellow, so I guess
I'm not going there.
Oh.
Good afternoon. From the Broadcast Legends newsroom, here are the latest headlines from 1951.
The U.S. Congress ratified the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution. Now, in case you've forgotten, it was the one that limited the U.S. presidential term to office of 8 years.
In Korea, UN forces recaptured the capital of Seoul in what was termed not a war, but a police action.
Maybe I was supposed to read that one. Here at home, President Harry Truman fired General Douglas MacArthur as commander of the forces in the Far East and ordered him back to the U.S.
When he returned, he addressed the Capitol and the Congress, of course, a joint session of Congress, and uttered the memorable phrase, "Old soldiers never die, they just fade away." And he did.
I like the way he did that.
Thank you very much. I feel like an old general. Battery.
In these days of the ubiquitous cell phone, it may be hard to remember that it was 1951 when the mayor of Englewood, New Jersey, called the mayors of Alameda County on the called the mayor of Alameda on the first direct dial telephone call coast to coast. I don't know why that was so hard.
And I have the wrong number. Okay. By the way, it was 1951 when AT&T became the first American corporation with over 1 million stockholders. At least that many people complained when water companies began fluoridation of the water to prevent tooth decay, and it seemed to work.
Electricity was generated from nuclear power for the first time in 1951, and the first nuclear bomb tests were conducted in the beautiful state of Nevada. And we hope the glow in the sky is that of Las Vegas.
Meanwhile, H-bomb tests were conducted at Enewetak Atoll in the Pacific, the story that late broadcasting legend Don Mosley covered for CBS. As he recalled, he did not report the experience as hair-raising.
It was 7 years ago when movie queen Elizabeth Taylor got her first divorce. Anyone remember the lucky fellow? No, it wasn't Eddie Fisher. Conrad Nicky Hilton Jr.
Good
She
job.
had wed 8 times, twice to Richard Burton, for those of you who are keeping score.
In an event that had no connection whatsoever with Miss Taylor's marital misgivings, 1951 was the year that Mr. Lacoste, not Lacoste, first put the alligator symbol on tennis shirts.
So that's what it is. 1951 was a good movie year too. If you tried to watch, or were tired of watching, that is, your 20-inch Philco TV, you went to see The African Queen, The Day the Earth Stood Still, A Streetcar Named Desire, and An American in Paris.
And All About Eve, which won the Academy Award for Best Picture. Bogey won Best Actor for African Queen, Vivian Lee for Streetcar. It was also the year of Jim Shock's top 10 favorite, Bedtime for Bonzo.
And who was the star of that movie? Ronald Reagan, yes.
And a monkey.
Which one? No, we won't get into that. There were a number of memorable books that year, including From Here to Eternity by James Jones, The Caine Mutiny by Herman Wolfe, and The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, and Truman Capote's Grass Park.
And in 1951, the man who took over as publisher of the San Francisco Examiner from his father died. William Randolph Hearst later, of course, became the inspiration for Orson Welles' film Citizen Kane, a film that was not allowed to be advertised in Hearst newspapers.
In broadcasting, radio was given ground fast to TV, which featured Ed Burroughs' first See It Now program, featuring a split-screen view of the Brooklyn Bridge and the Golden Gate Bridge. For the first time, anyone had ever seen both the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans at the same time.
I Love Lucy premiered on CBS, as did the Amos and Andy Show, and another little item called Dragnet. NBC broadcast the first televised opera, Amal and the Night Visitor.
You have some explaining to do. As I'm sure you are aware here today, and you're happy to hear, radio didn't totally disappear from 1951. A couple of geniuses named Bob and Ray premiered on NBC. That would be Bob Elliott and Ray Goodwin, of course.
And a station in Miami reported that a baseball pitcher in a Winter League game was ejected after beaning the batter. The pitcher later became famous for beaning the president of Cuba in 1956. His name, Fidel Castro.
Broadcast Legends headlines were written, produced, and directed by Jim Schock, who must have been sitting in front of his 1951 20-inch black and white Philco when he wrote these.
Tonight is the Phil Harris Alice Faye Show on NBC.
Now, can you turn this one on? Thank you. He'll get it right by the time we're ready to leave. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, enjoy your lunch, ladies and gentlemen. Our event picks up, as they say at NBC, on the other side. Well, I figure if we don't start now, Stanford will be playing, but they'll play tomorrow night. They'll be playing by the time we leave here. And so we're gonna get started. And they'll bring dessert and work around us, but otherwise, you know, we'll hit the traffic. All right. I hope you all enjoy your lunch. The bar will remain open. Something we said for that. All right. Now, welcome to the main event. While you're all here, I am pleased to present at this moment President of the California Historical Radio Society, CHRS, Mr. Steve Cushman, who will get things started.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming. It's just a great crowd here, biggest crowd we've had, and it's really always, I'm president of the California Historical Radio Society, and the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame is one of our programs. And we are just so pleased and want to thank Daryl and Peter for letting us bring the Hall of Fame into the Legends Lunch, where we can all have a great time and enjoy each other's company and celebrate the people that are going in. By the way, the news, 1951, a very good year for a lot of people I know in this room. So, I won't keep it long. We'll introduce Len, and then we'll introduce our MC, Stan Bunker, but I just wanted to let you know with some shameless self-promotion here that we usually have Radio Day by the Bay, and it was canceled in October because of the COVID and the small surroundings of Radio Central and the auditorium we use. But since then, we have scheduled, and it will be happening, Radio Day on the Bay. December 18th, we will be live aboard the USS Hornet. And we will have our antique radio auction. We will have the Royal Society Jazz Orchestra. We will have the CHRS Radio Dog Players doing a live radio play on stage called Out for Christmas, a suspense show. We'll have a lot of other things. You'll have an opportunity to buy restored radios, donate to us, and take them home as a premium. Great idea for Christmas. I could go on, but I'm not. I'm going to let the program happen, and now I'll introduce the chairman and the executive director of the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame, Harlan Shapiro. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming. It's wonderful to see the turnout. It's incredible. And we welcome you to the 16th annual Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame induction ceremonies under the auspices of CHRS. Today we're going to honor 11 inductees and a legendary station of the year, KOMA. This will bring our Bar Hop membership up to 220. It looks like all 220 are here. And that's covering the 112 years of broadcasting in the Bay Area. And if you look at the back of your program, I'm not going to read a lot of names, but the back of your program has the list of the Bay Area Hall of Fame members. And it covers everybody from Sybil Harold Trudeau, who was one of the original disc jockeys back in 1909 on KTUW, all the way to our 3 program hosts this year, Lamont Tonelli, Paul Wells, and Jack Cole. So again, we really quickly how we got here. The Bar Hop inductees were voted on by the living members of the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame and members of the CHRS. We're not in Chicago. The Executive Pioneer, Legend Awards, and the Legendary Station are chosen by the Board of Directors of the Bar Hop. So now let's celebrate the best of Bay Area radio talent. And here is our host, KCBS Morning Anchor Emeritus, Stan Bunker.
Emeritus, how cool is that? Get some elbow patches and pass to the faculty lounge and the whole thing. Well, it's great to see everyone here, and it's so cool just to be able to gather with fellow human beings anywhere these days. I do realize that I'm way out of my league because I see the world's best MC in the back of the room over there, Don Blue. Don? And I got walk-up music today, which was also extra cool, and bonus points for anybody who could identify the song and the artist. Greg Kinn, you're disqualified. It's the 1996 version of Heard It on the X by Los Super 7. So, pretty nice. All right, you got it? Got it? I have heard it on the X. All right. Well, you know, before we get into the program itself, let's just take a moment to thank each other and ourselves for the role we, radio people, have played for 112 years of an industry, born here in the Bay Area, and especially the last year and a half, when the power of a human voice and a human connection meant more than ever to all of our listeners, and I think probably to all of us. So thank us a lot. You know, it was 15 years ago that the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame inducted its first honorees, and if you're worried about today's luncheon going along, there were 37 members in the initial class, so we're going to beat that today. And I would like to take a quick moment to pay homage to the broadcasters who were inducted last year And you know, an artifact of that year, it was done virtually. Rosalie, I think, is here somewhere today. So just to run, I know some of them may be here today. Ron Barr, Warren Bogus, Candido, Lee Hammer's in the room, I know. Johnny Hatton, Greg Jarrett, Johnny Morris, Doc Pelzel, Dusty Rhodes, and Bill Wattenberg were the classic 20. So, let's get down to business. Our first inductee today is leading off because, well, we don't want him to fall asleep. He's a morning guy that's been up for a while already. Jack's been heard on Bay Area radio since the 1980s. Successful runs at K101, KDBK, nearly 20 years at Coit, of course, and for the last 5 years, or thereabouts, 98.1 The Breeze. And even if you've never heard one of Jack's stations and had it on your presets, very good chance you know his voice quite well. Jack has been a very successful voiceover talent. He's made his mark with countless major clients. He's being inducted in the program host music format category. And to present Jack Culp, Bar Hop member Sue Hall.
Which one? This one? Okay, hi. Which one is this thing on? It's really great to see everybody. Hi, Kim. Susan Lee Taylor, John Evans. Oh, my people are here. This is so great. Hi. You know, we haven't been out in so long. It's just lovely to get outside and see everybody. And I get to be here to introduce my friend Jack. I first met Jack Culp in 1988 at K101. And he was doing afternoons when I got there doing part-time. And just a little bit earlier than that, he was in a small little town called College Station, Pennsylvania.
State College.
What? State College. I'm sorry. There's a College Station there, I'm sure. Yeah, anyway, he, under a bet, decided that he was going to apply for a job at K101. And he bet that he wasn't going to get the job, and his friend said he was going to get the job, so he lost a bet against himself. So I'm not really sure what, but that's Jack, you know? He's just that humble. So he ended up in San Francisco, thanks for all of us. And he was there for a few years, as Stan mentioned, and so we met in '88. Also at K101 was his now lovely wife, Kim, who was in the sales side of things. And they were kind of hot and heavy. You guys try to keep it on the sly a little bit, I thought. Yeah, we tried. But some of us knew. And then in 1990, Jack was one of the first times, you know, he was let go, like all of us have been through. And that was the year that he was set to marry Kim and buy a house, and then he loses his job. Well, as Jack always does, he lands on his feet. He did some voiceover work, as Dan alluded to, and ended up at KOIT, Coit, in 1995. Part-time, Tommy Sanders decided to retire, Tommy Saunders, and there, lo and behold, there's Jack to do part-time fill-in when they hired him and said, "You're great, you know, we want you to stay." And again, Jack and I crossed paths at Coit, where I was there, and he was then let go in one of the stranger firings ever. I thought I was fired on the phone once. Jack was actually let go the day, but he found out the night before because somebody, his replacement, had posted it on the internet. I'm pretty close to this story, right? Yeah, he's talking about it now. But yeah, so it's like, wait, what? So anyway, Jack moves on, as he always does, lands on his feet at The Breeze, or as we love to call it, Febreze. And he's still smelling good after 6 years now, still there. So when I think of Jack, and I'll wrap this up and bring him up here, I think of I have a wonderful mother-in-law who grew up in Nazi-occupied Holland. And she used to have a saying about farmers in the field, that when the farmers fell or slipped in the field, it was, and pardon my terrible Dutch, it was "Jou hebt met jouw nurse in de boek gevallen." And what it actually translates to, does somebody speak Dutch here? Did I even get close? It actually means you've fallen with your nose in the butter as opposed to the cow shit. So Jack has seemed to fall in the butter every time. So put your nose out of the butter and get on up here. Congratulations.
Sue, that was really beautiful. You got most of the facts right. Just enough, but so at our table, Lee Hammer said, since I'm first, I get to set the standard for being brief, and I intend to do exactly that. So, but I just want to thank a few people. You know, landing on my feet at a place like the Breeze, it doesn't happen overnight, and the work that went into setting up that radio station to the success that it's enjoying today took an awful lot of work, as my morning partner Carolyn Ricardo will attest to that. Carolyn's in the back. When I told my friend, who's also in radio, about my induction, he said, "See what happens when you overstay your welcome long enough? They give you a trophy." That's exactly what happened. So I appreciate that. And I do want to thank some of the people that helped me Forrest Gump my way to this position. Especially the program directors that fired me. Because every time I got fired, I seem to have fallen up, which is rare in this business. But Jeff Statler, who hired me at K101 back in 1984 from not College Station, State College. So he saw something in me that I really didn't see in myself. As Bill Mann once said, you might remember Bill Mann as a radio and TV writer for the Examiner many years ago. He said, Sattler plucked me from radio obscurity from State College, Pennsylvania, and that's exactly what he did. But then from there, it was K101, and then Viacom, Larry Berger, hired me for Double 99. Does anybody remember that radio station? I think it lasted for about a year and a half or 2 years. And my friend Randy Pugsley, engineer extraordinaire, labeled the format as male menopause, and he was right on the head. He nailed it. And then from there it was on to KOIT and Susie Maisel, Alan Hodler, Chuck Tweedle. These are legends. And then it was Bill Conway who gave me a 3-month audition to fill Tommy Saunders' shoes, as if anyone could. And they liked what I did. I loved vaudeville, so that was back in 1997. So that had gone on for a while. And after that, it was Ricky Filiar, Don Parker, and Katie Wilcox at iHeart, who took me on to saw something that I might be able to contribute to the Breeze. And that was 6 years ago. So I'm very grateful for that. And then there's my family. Our sons, Andrew and Jordan. Andrew is a data analyst for Autodesk in Denver. Jordan is a musician and a recording engineer in Los Angeles. And if they were here today, I'd apologize for all the back-to-school nights that I fell asleep in, because it happened more than once. And the water polo games that ended at 9:30, I had to go right to bed, but I did what I could. But I'd especially like to thank my wife, Kim, over here. The support that you've shown me over the years, I just can't quantify at all, Kim. And people don't realize that the alarm that rings in my ear in the morning also rings in hers. So that's something that we've been sharing for the last 31 years. So I love you, and thank you all so very much. I'm in awe of the company that I'm with, the nominees and the inductees. I'm humbled by all this. Thank you very much.
Jack Kellum. I want to thank Sue and Jack for adhering to rules I failed to state at the beginning, which are keep it short, folks. 3 or 4 minutes, for the presenter, 4 or 5 for the inductee. Bob Brown does have some annoying sounds he'll play if things get out of hand. Next up, Lamont Tonelli. Inducted together into the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame. The other was Johnny Patrick and Helen Troy. They were among the first group of inductees 15 years ago. Lamont Hollywood came down from Winnipeg to San Jose's KSJO for a radio marriage with Peninsula native Paul Tonelli more than 30 years ago. And in the last 18 plus years on 107.7 The Bone, these two built a morning show legacy. Now, one of these guys called what they do frat boy radio. The other has referred to them as the PBS of fart jokes. Presenting Lamont Zanelli, the guy who arranged that radio marriage, former KSJO General Manager David Barenfeld, who is here from Hawaii today. David?
Well, I'm going to try to keep it short, and I will do the best I can, but since Dana's being awarded, and that'll take about 30 seconds. Listen, I worked with Dana twice, at KOME and at KSJO. I love Dana, and I'm telling you, I think that the award that Dana's getting later today is well-deserved and long overdue. Well, I'm going to try to keep it short, and I know it's big text, it looks like a long speech, but here's the deal, don't worry, I'll read it. So in 1985, I moved to the Bay Area to go to KOME. At the time, KOME was the dominant, legendary radio station. KSJO was going back and forth and trying to find its legs. And then in 1988, I was hired as the general manager of KSJO, and we had Perry Stone on the air, which was a pretty large and huge rated radio show. In March of 1989, Perry said something that inflamed the Girl Scouts and drove the market nuts, and invited the FCC to come into the radio station. I was a general manager for about 3 months when the FCC came walking in and said, "We'd like to ask you about these 10 things." And I was fortunate that my hands were clean. I was across the street at KOME at the time when all that stuff was going on, so it was like, whew. But we had to make a change. Paul was the obvious choice. He was such a great contributor to Perry's show. And for those of you who don't remember, KSJO at that point in Morning Drive with the Shock Jock before Stern was syndicated, we had a 34 share in men 18 to 34. And we were and it's a South Bay radio station, we were number 2, 18 to 34 men in San Francisco. That show had to get blown up, unfortunately. Paul was the obvious choice to bring in, but then it was like, okay, what do we do? To bring in another shock jock where everybody was going to compare whoever was coming into Perry was going to be a mistake. And every day that we didn't have someone to come in, you could feel the audience going to probably KOME. So at the time I said to the program director, "You got any tapes? Anybody send any tapes? By the way, does everybody know what tapes are?" I wasn't born in 1951, but I know what tapes are. Okay, so he said, "No, we're not really getting any tapes." And I said, "Well, where are the old tapes?" And he goes, "Oh, it's in the back." So I'm ripping through the box, and I see an unopened, fat manila envelope with the return address, Lamont Hollywood, Winnipeg, Manitoba. And I go, "What about this?" And he goes, program director said, "I'm not sure that this would be the right guy for a rock station." Well, if you read between the lines, Lamont was the right guy. I said, "Do me a favor, put the tape on." Within 30 seconds, it was very clear that this guy was a major talent. I called him up, and I said, "Hey, Lamont, this is David Barenfeld from KSJO." He goes, "I'm going to call you right back." It's a true story, right? True story. And I'm saying to myself, what? Within a minute, he calls back, and he says, "Hey, Dave, the reason I hung up is because I had a friend. I told him today I was going to call KSJO and kind of pitch the morning show. And when you called, I thought he was goofing me." And I said, "Well, no, I'm really me." And heard your tape. So, pretty good. Tomorrow, can you do me a favor? Record your show unscoped. Here's the FedEx number. Send it to me. 2 days later, we get the tape. And the rest is history. So I'm going to wrap this up by just saying, I called him and I said, "Hey, great show. No, I didn't. I said, I don't know what happened. The tape's erased. Can you do me another favor and send us another show? And he did. So the rest is really history. And since I heard half of the, or a third of the NBC chime right now, what I want to do is just kind of, in closing, basically say that in 1989, when everybody doubted the show, and inside the radio station they called it David's Folly for the first year that it was on the air, the audience grew and stuck, first at KSJO and now for the past 18 years at The Bone. Lamont and Paul can tell you their stories, and I'm sorry I couldn't get into the weeds as it relates to Paul and that stuff. But now here we are 32 years later, where we're recognizing what Paul and Lamont have done. 8,000 mornings. Well, Lamont's done 8,000 mornings. I'm not sure how many. They, obviously, I'm flattered and I should be introducing them, but before I do, I want to congratulate Dana Jen for his role in this year's awards. I hired Dana at KSJO. I also worked with Lori Roberts, another inductee. KSJO, and I'm flattered that KOME has been awarded as well. So, without further ado, my fellow broadcasters, let me introduce to you with pleasure and proudness, Lamont Antonelli.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Who went with the microphone? What is this?
First off, David Barenfeld, the best general manager I have ever worked for. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
Also, thank you to Paul Tonelli, a great partner and a better human being over the last 32 years. I look around this room right now, and what I see is a room full of douchebags that made us wait 32 freaking years. Are you fucking kidding me? 32 years? I did some math here. I did some math. We were actually eligible in 1996.
25 years.
Right. 32 fucking years for lunch at the Bass Cultural Center.
It's delicious, by the way.
By the way, was Sizzler booked today? Holy Corral, are you kidding me? Lunch at the Bass Center. By the way, by 1996, we were actually nominated for 5 awards nationally, but you guys made us wait 32 years. I'm going to put this in perspective for you. We were eligible before 3 big companies ruined radio as we know it, right?
Well, all I'd like to say is, we'd like to thank the esteemed members of the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame for this recognition and this honor. We're very proud to be here. I'd also like to thank Lee Hammer, last year's entrant into the Hall of Fame. He nominated us, and we would be remiss not to acknowledge Tony Salvador, the legend at KVR, K-Pop, and Tony took the chance on us and brought us into the Bone. And one of our favorite memories that Lamont and I always talk about is Tony coming into the studio the last hour of the show, flopping down on a chair, putting his feet up on the counter and saying, "Hey boys, play some Honky Tonk Woman by Rolling Stone." I love that song.
Music format was out the door at that point. Tony was sitting there in the room. And by the way, Tony Salvador, my second favorite general manager. We were very close to David Barenfeld, but I'll tell you why you kind of went down the list. Number 2. We were going through contract negotiations once, and Tony Salvador calls us into his office. "Boys, I hate to do it. The industry's taking a beating. We're going to give you a $25,000 pay cut." And I go, 25 grand? So by then, our ratings are climbing. And I go, "Tonell, we need an agent." So we hire the agent. Tony, you know the story? We hire the agent. The agent then talks to John Dick, John Dickey ends up giving us not only the $25,000 back, he gave us $125,000 each more on the contract. On a swing of $150,000. Now, afterwards, Tony calls us into the office after we signed the deal, and he goes, "Boy, I gotta tell you, I can't believe you paid me that kind of money. I wouldn't pay it to you." So Tony, that's why you are number 2 on the list. Also, let me say this. We should recognize other members of the show on this plaque because over the 32 years we've had some great members. First off, I'm going to point out Shasta has been on the show for 10 years. Shasta, you should be in here because you're eligible after 7. Baby Huey has been on our show. And if he doesn't get his name on the plaque now, let's face it, it's never going to happen. So let's put Baby Huey on. Also, Smelly, who works on our show. Smelly makes things happen. He's the comedic genius behind the show. And I will tell you this, we should mention super producer Sully, who is with us. For 15 years, we tortured this guy. We tortured the shit out of him. We had him piss on an electric fence, had him artificially inseminate a bull.
Crash into a wall without an airbag.
That's exactly. And also, big thanks to our listeners, people who contribute to the show, like Big Dick Black. We have a listener who is stoned by 4 o'clock every day, blazing Nana. She's with us. Jason the plumber is here. You know he's not a member of District 38. He comes to my house because he's in San Jose and fixes my plumbing for free. And also, the great Mr. C from heaven. Howard comes out from heaven, also our group clergy. So we've got to thank them. Hey, shove those pipes and think 32 years for this. I'm not turning into Ralph Barbieri on you.
Here. And I'll just add, we all have, and I'm sure everybody can relate to, this would never happen if this didn't happen kind of a moment in your career. This never happens if, that kind of a thing. Well, I had an internship at KYUU when Don Blue was doing the morning show, and I was working in the news department with Gil Haar, and I turned, luckily, a 6-month internship into 14 months. And at the end of 14 months, Gil said, "You got to get out of here and get a job." So the summer of '86, I went to look for a job at UPS. On the advice of my good friend Jeff Colombini, who's sitting right over here. Jeff said, "Hey, it's a piece of cake, you'll get in." So you do a whole week-long orientation. And at the end of that week, on Friday, you take a driving test in a UPS truck. And so it was a piece of cake. Friday, get to the driving test, and I was ultimately confident that I would pass that test. And I was the last one to go. There were about 10 people on the truck. And we were driving over the Petro District near 24th and York. And I had to make a right turn onto York on a very narrow street that cars parked on both sides, and I clipped a parked car. That was on Friday. I failed the UPS driving test and then was out of the Brown Army. On Monday, the following Monday, Gil Haar gives me a call at home. I never would have been at home if I would have been at work. Like, Gil says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Nothing." And he says, I have a little job opportunity for you with John Hamilton, producing ski reports for John Hamilton on the go at KGO. So I took the job. It was like, 4 hours in the morning producing ski reports. That led to a traffic reporting job at Traffic Central, which led to my partnership with Lamont, which never would have happened if I didn't hit that parked car. So thank you to Gil Haar. I know he's not here today. I know he's a member of the Bay Area Hall of Fame. That's the news, so now you know he's one of the best. Thank you to Gil Haar.
Now, I also have to say, thank you for the Susan Lucci Award for 32 years waiting. A big congratulations as well to Dana Jang, because Dana, you were a legend when I was actually working with you in 1992. You've been in the market for like 20 years, so well-deserved for Dana Jang as well.
Final couple of things, and then we start ringing the bells. I want to introduce my mom, Elsie Tonelli. My mom turned 95 last month. Still works at the Finley drugstore 3 days a week because my brother is into elder abuse. I don't know, but he ran for the drugstore. That's just a thank you, Mom, to your support, yours, and Dad's support through my career, which was fantastic. My wife, Lisa, who has put up with 32 years of Fat Radio. Bar nights until 2 a.m. and then out the door at 4 a.m. to do the morning show. And there might have been a hint or two of strippers in the studio that day. So thanks for being with me every step of the way. Let me tell you something about Lamont real quick. This is important, all right? None of this. We talk about things, if this didn't happen, it wouldn't work. None of this happens without Lamont. We fool around it a lot.
I'll talk for 20 more minutes.
We fool around a lot on the air, but Lamont, under that, is a total radio pro. He can do any job at the radio station. He just happens to have the fun job. He could program, he could be a GM, he could be a sales manager, he could be a promotions manager, he could do any job at the radio station. He knows the business inside and out. He knows music, formats, the clock, and most importantly, he knows how to present something to an audience that they'll grab onto. His talent, his work ethic, his energy, continuous energy, and his day-to-day enthusiasm is the reason the show is where it is and the reason that we're here today doing this. For 32 years, I've had a firm grip on those coattails. And it has been a hell of a ride. And for all of it, I thank you.
Well, thank you.
Final couple of thank yous to my family, my brother, and my 5 sisters, who every day of the week for the past 32 years have shaken their heads saying, "You call that work?" And then we got a bunch of tables of knuckleheads over here. These are all the guys I grew up with. All the Westlake guys, radio guys. We got our Baylock guys, Mark Nieto, Rob Lawson, Tom Fielder, Jeff Frick, who created the Bay Area Legends of Broadcasting out of I don't know what. They're the only 4 members who still exist. But the Westlake guys, the guys I grew up with in Daly City, I'm a native. Very special, wouldn't have done it without him. And in closing, I will say, our Daly City cheer, Alakazam, Kazim Kazam, son of a bitch, goddamn, horse's ass, cow's titty, we are the boys from Daly City. Thank you.
They're called kid acts or dog acts when we're out in Paul Wells rounds out our group of music format programmers, and it sounds weird for me to say Paul Wells out loud because I grew up West Virginia with the Lobster. Paul's done a million things in Bay Area radio. Hey guys, chill. Showed up on KOME, there's a common thread here today, back in the 70s. He's made the transition from the old world of radio into the new world of streams and podcasts. And his presenter today is Paul Provatoni, a radio survivor once known on the airwaves as Billy Steele. Billy.
And I might add, Daly City boy, but I didn't know the cow's titty. You
I'm honored here to be today to celebrate, is it five decades of radio? Yeah. 5 decades. Amazing. Paul Lobster Wells started out, and I'm going to take you guys back, because it's funny, with so many friends, former bosses, congratulations, Dana. I'm honored to be here today. And it's funny, the universe pulls us together. It's a strange thing, and Lobster always said to me, it's those cosmic accidents that happen in life. And I'm going to talk about a few of them. A boy, young man, maybe 18, 19 years old, goes to a show. Now, we're talking 1967. In 1967, how do you prep for a show? Well, I would think maybe you want to take some beer, maybe you've got your stash, and away you go. Food, maybe I got a bag of chips, right? That's about as much prep. But this man decides, I'm taking a tape recorder. And it wasn't for the left channel, right channel, I'm booting the show. It was because he was somehow drawn, the universe drew him to take a tape recorder to a show that turned out to be a pivotal point in all of our lives. I'm talking about Woodstock. And was it 69? Okay, well, 69. Those artists that were at the show in 69, they weaved their way throughout his career, a flag that he always waved for the Summer of Love, and for those bands, always supporting them throughout his career, that went on. And I'll get to the cosmic accident in that tape, because it comes later in his career. But his career, another cosmic accident, when he moved out from New York to California, got a job volunteering at KZSU at Stanford, got a show. He reflected back on his days and sitting in a van, his dad's van, a blue Econoline, listening to Procol Harum. And while he was listening to Robin Trower, had visions of a blue lobster punching buttons on a key, on a console. Now, you must have been smoking something. I'm just speculating. In Dad's van, shame on you. So it was his van. They named the van the Mighty Blue Lobster. And he named his show that. And as time went on, when he got to Stanford, he named his show The Lobster Box. Everybody called him Lobster. Then from there, he got to KSJO, then KOME, then back to KSJO, KLIV, the original KSAN, the Quake, went to LA, KMET, from KMET, Morning Man at Pure Rock, KNAC in Long Beach, legendary call letters, back to KSJO where he did the lobster breakfast and mornings, then to KRQR in San Francisco. At KRQR, Lobster hired me, my first professional gig, and I owe you for that, always. I'm grateful. Great times at the station. From there, on to KFOX, back to KRQR. And it's interesting that at KRQR, when he came back, he got into syndication, did a Summer of Love special, pulled out that tape from Woodstock, took bits of it, and it played syndicated across the nation. How the universe weaves its way, those cosmic accidents that happen from his name, from you making a decision to record yourself. It's crazy how the world works. And to today, right now, he's at the river. Ladies and gentlemen, a great career, many stories. Paul Lobster Wells.
any microphone. Thank you so much for being here. Let's give it up for the staff and for the Mass Cultural Center. And I'm going to encourage, I don't know if it's legal or not for us to leave tips, but I want my table to tip. Okay? So I hope we all help the staff out because their jobs are ridiculously hard to work in a restaurant these days. Any kind of a place like this that normally would have many events. And I really appreciate everybody coming out here today because it's really wonderful. I used to show up at these and I feel like the kid in the room. Yeah. Paul Provatoni, better known as Billy Steele, when he first showed up, I had to interview him when CBS and KRQR. Remember when companies can only own one AM and one FM and one TV station in any given market? And only a total of what 18? Wasn't it? Something like that? Yeah. When you go to an NAB back then, it wasn't just the corporate types, you know, using their expense accounts. It was the mom and pops of all the radio stations, all the community radio stations across the country, or as I refer to them, the men with white belts and the women with big hair who loved them. But they knew that part. So I did prepare a speech 7 years ago. Wrong one. Sorry. I actually have a few points to write down, but that's how I've always done it, kind of off the cuff. When I started in 1972, Dana Chang and I at KSJO, he from KKUP in Cupertino and me from KZSU at Stanford, were both part-timers together in 1972, which is like, you know, half a freaking century ago. So it's amazing to me and such an honor to be inducted in the same class of 2021 as Dana and as the station we both fled to when Top 40 took over KSJO with new owners, which was KOME, where I worked from 1974 to 1976. And talking about cosmic accidents, you know, you don't know where you're going to go next. My year in LA, which I called Exile on Main Street, you know, I did mornings in LA, I wind up at KMET, I come back to PAC and I get fired over the phone, that's always lovely, by someone who wasn't even the program director, who was acting program director. That was her first act. So in 1972 to 1974, I was a part-timer, I was a kid on the air staff, and right before we went Top 40, Sterling Recreation Organization bought radio. They were a movie theater company. And old Fred Dance was, you know, was an independent company from Seattle area. He decided to have this group PD named Bo Donovan. Can you tell he was a Top 40 DJ? And Bo calls me in his office the same day he fires the program director, Doug Drost, or as we refer to him, Drunk Dose. The same day as Doug fires me and I'm a kid on the air staff. Now, all right, I'm a kid from the Bronx, all right? Don't fuck with me. So I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do Sweat. So, you know, I could tell a lot of different stories, but this one just came up in the mind. So I'm called into his office. I know he's already fired the program director. I know he's going to go Top 40 because I already had a vision of this. And the vision of the lobster wasn't mine. It was my friend in the passenger seat running shotgun who was really loaded. I was driving. But yes, Robin Trower's guitar playing sounded like a lobster to him that was doing what we do in radio. It took me years to realize I fulfilled the original dream. I don't have a partner, by the way, so I should get extra time, Bob. Okay? Bob Brown, let's hear it for him doing the controls there. He asked me what music I wanted, but, you know, Tom Petty's The Last DJ because there's a whole story there, but let me just complete the one with Bo Donovan. Bo has me come in, I sit down across his desk. I'm like 23, going on 24. And I look at him, and he looks at me and goes, Paul, I'm gonna have to let you go. And I said, just like this, don't worry, Bo. You know, you play dumb sometimes, it works. And he actually did start to sweat, trying to explain to me what it meant. I mean, I'm going to have to let you go. Your services are no longer wanted. That's all I wanted. 2.5 years later, I get hired back by KSJO from KOME and given the office I was fired at. And Dana and I, years later, Pat Evans, who was an early woman who actually was a program director in major markets. Pat Evans was program director of, yes, KOME for one, KSFX before KOME in San Francisco, which were one of the 5 rock stations I went to. You know, that was Lamont's time. So I wind up posting ridiculous ratings if Arbitron, remember Arbitron? If Arbitron had handed me and said, you fill it out, I wouldn't have given myself an 18+ share of men 18+. I wouldn't have given myself a 51% Q, which is a majority of men 18-24, which was the target market. My phone rang, and the company that owned the station, I said to Don Wright, who passed away this year, you didn't see him up there, so he deserves it. Don Wright was a great, funny guy, intelligent program director, was my PD at KSJO. And I don't want to rank all the PDs. I can tell you good ones and bad ones. But Dana and I worked together, so years later, after Pat passes away, he says to me at her memorial, her celebration of life, how come you didn't tell me that you were going to KSJO? And I said, Dana, the ink literally wasn't dry until right before I went on the air on July 4th weekend on Friday night at KSJO. And I left KOME at midnight. I said on Monday, the price of lobster goes down 5.3 points. That's all I said. And then on Monday at 6 p.m. I was on the air at KSJO and they were touting it. But 2 weeks before that, I went out with Dan Tapson, who was the GM, who's another guy who was a great GM. And we had dinner at one of the trade restaurants, because I think trade was the only thing that Dan lived on, food. And I told him, well, I'm getting offers. Well, what do I do if you get an offer? If I get an offer you can't refuse? He goes, well, what do you do with an offer you can't refuse? We both laugh. So that was my 2 weeks notice. I go back into his office after all that happened, and on Tuesday afternoon, I turned my keys in. One of our salespeople is standing in the office. Said, who's seen From Russia with Love? All right, so you'll get the punchline here because it's in the movie. So I go in, one of the salespeople is in his office, and she looks at me and she goes, you traitor! And I said, that's traitor. And then I gave Dan his keys and thanked him, and that was a great time. So there's other notes here. Oh yeah, I didn't bring my drink up. But the great thing about alcohol is, it's hand sanitizer for your throat. It's not bleach, but it does the same thing. So I guess that's a punchline. I want to thank Paul Power-Batoni, Billy Steele. I want to also acknowledge Leslie Kay, sitting right there. Leslie's my associate producer with the Will and Willie Show, produced by my company, Flow Communications, with Will Durst, who's recovering from a stroke, and Willie Brown, the ex-mayor of San Francisco. And we swam against the tide of radio, where if you're not an echo chamber, you're not welcome on the air. So one of these days, that will break through again in San Francisco and other major markets. Even the big companies will realize entertainment is what we're here for. And I came for the music, and I'm still getting to play the music on the radio that I love and have a say on what I play. And that was what I broke in as a kid into on FM rock radio, progressive and freeform. And so I'm still carrying the flag, as Paul said. So thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure. And Lamont, yeah, big deal. You waited how long?
We're going to make a little bit of a lineup change here in deference to one of our current Hall of Fame members who has to get to work. The American League apparently won't hold the starting time of the A's game. So we're going to slide Marty Lurie, our next inductee. Marty is our 2021 Sportscaster inductee. Not one of the kids who grew up knowing he'd be on the radio. He was a lawyer for a long time, but his love of baseball won out. He was done with the law by the mid-90s and then began a 10-year run on A's pregame shows. He continues his work to this day with work on the Giants' flagship station, KNBR. Marty's also been involved in numerous projects dealing with baseball history, and his presenter today is the guy who has to get to work, Bay Area Radio Hall of Famer Ken Korach.
Thank you, Stan, and congratulations on an incredible career. We worked together about 35 years ago at KCBS, and in the meantime, there are probably 18 people in this room who've rejected my audition tapes since then. The A's have lost 4 games in a row. We're 8 games out of first place, but they haven't canceled the season quite yet, so I do have to get to work. Marty Lurie and I started working together when Marty joined the A's broadcast doing pregame shows about 25 or 26 years ago. And it was Marty and Bill King and Ray Fosse and myself. And Marty's story is just incredible. And when spring training starts next year, the first voice you're going to hear if you're a Giants fan on the pregame show will be Marty's. And when Marty's voice comes over the radio, I think that's a signal that everything is right with the world, because we've come through the long winter and all the symbolism about the spring training, season blooming, like the saguaro cactus in Phoenix and all that. And I really believe in that. And I think that there's a metaphor there that speaks about Marty's career too, because his career is like one of renewal and rebirth, because Marty was a criminal defense attorney for about 25 years here in the Bay Area. And it was really intense work and difficult. And he fried at the end of that time. And he decided to try to pursue something different. And I mean, he was burned out, but you're a middle-aged guy. What are you going to do with your life when you realize that your career is something you just can't do anymore? But he always had this love of baseball from the time that he went to Ebbets Field as a kid. And he decided, I think maybe I can make a go of working in baseball and doing shows. And he wound up on a small little station out in the East Bay at El Cerrito High, right? 5,000 watt station. I mean, I worked on stations that were 250 watts at night, but never on a, 5,000 watt or 500, but 5 watts, right? Literally 5 watts, right? But he's built his career from there. And I think, with Marty going in the Hall of Fame today, the one thing I think of when people have asked, what has Marty done to deserve getting here? He's worked his ass off. And he's a one-man band. He produces the shows, he does all the interviews, he arranges for the time, and he's been doing this for 25 years. He's interviewed over 10,000 people. He's interviewed players, coaches, Hall of Famers, managers, executives. One time, he interviewed an umpire. And then Bill King said, "Don't ever do that again." That was like a terrifying experience, wasn't it? I mean, Bill on Mother's Day in 1968 and all that, and the famous tape that they had to Watergate the tape because Bill was going to get fired when he was working for the Workers. But, Marty, his love of the game, I think, comes through every broadcast. And he worked with us until 2009. 2010 started with the Giants. He became Marathon Marty because I'd be driving to an A's game in the morning, listen to Marty, he'd be on. A's game would end, turn on KNBR, Marty was on. Go to dinner, turn on the radio, Marty's on. Finish dinner, Marty's on. Go home, have a glass of wine, get ready for bed, Marty's on. Wake up the next morning, Marty's on. But it wasn't that he just wanted to talk, it was because people wanted to talk to him. Because he had an incredibly easy and wonderful style and relaxed style of doing what he did and he talked baseball, and I think especially in these COVID times, that it was really important. And all of you who work in radio, I think, provided. Chick Hearn, when he was doing the Lakers, used to dedicate his broadcast to the shut-ins. And I think that, you know, all of you who are working in this business, and, you know, thankfully I still am, that, you know, having that companion on the air, like Marty has meant so much to people who couldn't get out and maybe go to a game, and that was something that was so valued, and that time was valued by them. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Marty Lurie.
Well, what a pleasure to be here. Beautiful day for a ball game, right? And I think we'll be able to watch it. It starts at 5:10. We can watch it in the lobby. But I want to thank everyone who voted for me. It was a shock when I got the little text from Jeremiah over at KMBR. I thought he was just texting me to say, gee, congratulations on being nominated. And all of a sudden he said, no, you won. And I said, really? And then, of course, Brian Murphy, Tom Tolbert, Tim Roy, and the great Sam Skinner, they were in the group, and somehow I won. So it's one of the tremendous honors of my life. And I've done a lot of different things in life. I've tried numerous 3 capital cases beginning to end, handled drunk driving, homicides, and all that kind of stuff. But my love really was for baseball. And when I left law in 1995, I said, what am I going to do? And I went to some A's games with a friend, Ken Donaghy. And I would sit and I would analyze the game and talk about it. And people said, you ought to be on the radio. I said, really? I've never been on the radio in my life. That's why I love hearing the stories of Lamont and Tonelli and everybody else. You know, your lives have been involved with radio the whole time. Well, for me, I kind of walked into it at age 49. So how did I do it? My son, Evan, who's here, played football at El Cerrito High School. And I went over to El Cerrito and had KECG, which, as Ken said, was 5 watts. Now, I could go outside and yell. So I went and saw Philip Morgan, who was the uncle of Reagan Upshaw, who was a very good football player at Cal and also in the East Bay. And I said, Phil, I'd like to try a show on the radio. And he said, absolutely, come on in, 10:30. The station is free and you can come on. And I went in the first time and I brought in lists of things and who was the batting champion and rosters and all that, because I was going to be on for a half an hour. And all of a sudden the red light came on. There's no commercials at KCG, it's like public radio. And I had to start talking. And I talked for the half hour without stopping. And I said, boy, that was fun. And then I realized I'm a lawyer, I can talk forever about nothing. And the skills really transferred of being in a courtroom, of putting on a case, doing something for a jury to convince them, and to do it in a personable way where it's not about me, but it's about the story. And that's what baseball meant to me. So within a couple of months, I was credentialed for a little KCG from the A's, the Giants, the Raiders, the 49ers, team tennis, you name it. And I went with the Marantz tape recorder, and I go to all these places and do these interviews and go back to KCG and play them. I was going to be ESPN radio, and I wanted to get phone calls from people. I was going to do the whole thing. So no one would ever call because no one could hear it. So I would have the judges from San Francisco Superior Court, David Garcia, Ed Stern, Tim Reardon, my dear friend. I would have them call me at their recess. So I would have people to talk to during the show. So here I am. It's now the beginning of the baseball season in 1996, and what's so important about my story is the validation that I got. I didn't know if I could do this. I knew I loved baseball. I knew I could connect the dots from 1950 right up to yesterday and the game the Giants lost 7-6. But I didn't know do people like it and things like that. And that's where my story really is all about. And it's the validation I got along the way. And Ken Korak was the first one, because I would come in and do the A's broadcast and run and back and go to KCG. But for Ken, he accepted me right away and loved to talk baseball with me. And has been my dear friend since I started in 1996. So along with Ken was Bill King. And Bill would sit there and I'd be talking, and Bill would sit there and he'd be listening to what I had to say. And Bill King, my God, listening to me. And that was the validation that got me going at that point. I remember the first time I went to any sporting event, and of course I was new to radio, and I heard this voice that said, "My God, that's Bruce McGowan. Holy cow." And I got to hear him. So the journey has been the acceptance by everybody, whether it's at KMBR, wherever it was. But a very quick story, how I started on the A's broadcast was KATD. You remember 990. Of course, Len remembers. Len advertised Round Table Pizza on KATD quite a bit. Joe Beery was the general manager. And I didn't really know anything. I'd be in the press box talking. And Joe Beery loved the Red Sox from 1948. Well, I was the only one who knew what he was talking about. So Joe Beery said, "Come on my station and you can do a 20-minute show before the A's game. And you know what? You can sell an ad and keep the money." I said, "Boy, this is like being a lawyer again." So now I'm on the air at KATD, and of course the A's change stations every year like you change your shirt. And I went from KATD to KBL with Carter B. Smith and Mike Cleary, wonderful men. And then I went to KFRC and other stations, and then Larry Baer heard me over the years, and Larry said, "Come to KMBR," and that's where Lee Hammer comes in, and brought me to KMBR, where I've been ever since, and I thank him so much for doing that, and I love the audience. And how do I do it? One, because of Raph, who's my producer at the station. Everything I do is remote. George taught me a long time ago, the station can be on fire, but you'll never know it. And Raph has everything together at the station. So Raph, 15, 16 years of us together, you're the glue of this show for me. And the other people are the sponsors. Rob Georgie, Georgie Brothers, John Dugan of Original Joe's, and people like that. So my story really is one of validation, and I do the show for you. And I love to interchange with the audience, and it's going to be a heck of a season once again. And I've done over 4,000 pre-game and post-game shows over these 25 years. Literally I've been on the air probably 10,000 hours. And as I tell my children, Aaron, who helped me as a 9-year-old, put the spin numbers and the Comrex and all, and the Nexus and all that. And I tell Bonnie and Evan and Aaron, just show up. Show up every day. And that's the key to life. Show up and do your job every day, and that is something that I've done. So I'll finish this and thank everybody at Barhoff and the voters, and to give me this honor is unbelievable for me to stand here and be able to look at you and accept this honor. And I'll use the words of Lou Gehrig, and I'll use his New York accent if you ever hear his speech. And I'll say it from the bottom of my heart today, and I thank everyone for being here. And Michael Gaines, my dearest friend in the world. Bill King always said, make sure you're talking to one person in your mind. Well, Michael Gaines and I have talked baseball since we're 15 years old. And Bill said, always make sure the person's naked. Michael, I couldn't do that. But I talk to you on the air for everything I do. You and I are talking baseball, and that's what I do. But in the words of Lou Gehrig, I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
Secret about my failure as a talk show host, and that is, I just have friends, neighbors, and my wife to call me when I wasn't getting calls. I had that Superior Court judges. Speaking of talk show hosts, Peter B. Collins is this year's inductee in the talk format. Peter B. was on the air in Chicago as a teenager before arriving in the Bay Area in the mid-70s. His long and varied resume includes time at a number of legendary stations. Let's see if I've got most of them. KGO, KRQR, KNBR, KSFO. And you may have noticed that a talk radio medium dominated by conservative voices, Peter B. has been that guy. He's also spent many years, and this is an important note about Peter, serving our union, SAG-AFTRA, dating back to when we were just AFTRA, but I should note, not going all the way back to when we were just AFRA. Here to present Peter B. Collins is the James Wallace Chair Professor in Journalism, which is a mighty big title for a man I know and love. Dr. Peter Lawford from the University of Oregon.
Thank you, Stan. I have to just about you and anybody else that was gracious enough to stick out their hand to me, because you may know that Oregon is the Missouri of the West Coast in terms of COVID. It is a disaster. There's the I-5 corridor. That's lovely. It's basically Marin County north of the state line, and then there's the rest of western Missouri, which is the rest of the state. So that's why I've been hanging out outside with the mask on. Peter B. Collins and I go back a long way as radio vagabonds, often vagabonding together. He gave me this cheat sheet. We've known each other for about 30 years, and I had no idea of some of the intriguing past, which I'll share with you briefly. He was the third of 5 sons. One of those brothers sat next to me when I dared to come into the room to grab my plate and go outside and eat. And his parents, their parents apparently were worried because Peter didn't speak until he was 3, but then he reports to me that when he started to talk, he talked in complete sentences. And as those of you who have listened to him on the radio know, he hasn't stopped talking, usually in those complete sentences. In the 4th grade, his speech and drama teacher taught his class how to produce radio plays before a live audience and create sound effects. And that's when the theater of the mind captured him. By the 5th grade, he was, back in those days of the 9th caller, he was the 9th caller to WUBE, and he won a Beatles LP at a tour of the station when he went to collect his prize. And that's when, as he puts it, in this COVID era, he became infected with radio virus. By the 7th grade, he took touch typing and then speed reading. These are skills that most of us should know and most of us don't, and have served him well. But he sped read, he claims, the Communications Act of 1934. Many of us, even back in the days of a 3rd-class license, had to struggle to answer the questions that were so mindless in order to get that license. And at 13, he then took that knowledge and typed up a challenge to the license renewal of the top-rated station in Cincinnati after they cut news coverage and fired his favorite newscaster. So the general manager of the station requested a meeting with this listener, and he had to get his mother to drive him to the station. And the general manager was shocked to see this listener was not the president of the Chamber of Commerce. By high school, he got WLW to donate an antiquated studio to the high school, a studio that was built by Paul Crosley. Some of you, maybe most of you, know what that meant, dated to 1925. and he started a closed-circuit feed to the student lounge. And that's when Peter B. discovered the magic that you just heard about trades. He realized he could get free records. And in my careers with Peter, I know that he's gone from free records, that I don't think you'll mind if I mention, to automobiles. But that's a story that is not for me to tell. His first job was the result of nepotism. His father knew a former state senator who owned 4 small market stations in northern Ohio, and Peter was named group program director, and that was when he still was about at that age when he needed his mother to take him to work. He went to Northwestern in Chicago. He called the PD at WBBM and asked for a tour. And this is the kind of magic that so often happens to us in this business. The PD said he did not have time for giving a tour, but he did need a weekend guy. Welcome to WBBM. Isn't that the radio story? Isn't that the radio story? So Peter and I met at KNBR when Peter had a talk show, as Stan just mentioned, that wasn't another Rush Limbaugh. In fact, it was adjacent to Rush Limbaugh. I filled in for him for a while. And Peter did an amazing thing at that radio station, which is he interviewed Limbaugh to generate the positive kind of energy that radio is so good at when opposing views. I heard the chimes. I heard the chimes, but I have to tell you that when I was the program director at WRC in Washington, I tried to hire Peter, and for some reason the general manager just hated him. But I did get him a tryout in the morning with the morning guy, and Peter wrote in the notes here that this was a conservative morning host. He wasn't a conservative, he was a maniacal, right-wing crazy man, and Peter was on the air with him, and on the air this guy showed Peter the loaded revolver that he kept with him at all times because he's an American. We're #1. I brought Peter over to Berlin when I was program director there, and Peter was the consultant who trained a lot of my hosts there. They weren't comfortable giving their personal opinions on the radio, a legacy of the Nazi era. And then we worked together, I'll be done in a second, in Amsterdam, because you may remember when Theo van Gogh was assassinated on the streets of Amsterdam. He's a grandnephew of the artist, and he was a talk show host with us at the radio station in Amsterdam. Peter was assigned by me to consult him, and Theo van Gogh said, "I don't need no damn consultants." Now, the one thing Peter left out here, and I don't know if it's his advancing age, his pride, or he doesn't want you to know, but Peter and I spent time in New York on the Upper East Side in the mansion of one Guccione, the publisher, to throw away the evidence here, the publisher of Penthouse, where the Gooch was busy looking at these impressionist paintings that were stacked in his office trying to decide which one might be worth framing. And Peter and I were there working on launching the OWL Network. Old white liberals, and he'll tell you someday, probably not today, about hanging out with Guccione at the Penthouse mansion. Peter B. Collins.
Sunny in the sun glows.
Thank you very much, Peter Lawford. And thanks to all of you, illustrious members of this group. This is an honor I did not seek and one that I did not lobby for. But I'm really grateful. And I'm touched, and I appreciate the validation of my peers, and the recognition of what passes for a career in radio. So thank you very much. I also want to begin by thanking people important to me, my loving partner Kathy of 30 years, and our son David, who put up with the ups and downs of a radio career. Prior to that, my ex-wife Susan, who rode the radio waves with me in the 70s and 80s. I want to acknowledge my brother Steve Burke, who was installed this week as a member of the Mill Valley City Council. We're very proud of that. I also want to acknowledge that, particularly as a talk show host, you don't do this alone. And I've been fortunate to have excellent producers over the years. And at my table, Mary Finn, who worked with me at KNBR. Liz Einbinder couldn't be here today. Tim Burr, or Khan, who worked with me at KSFO. Katrina Rill, who worked with me on satellite radio and when I hosted a syndicated program in the aughts. And Sandy Althouse, who was a very important member of our radio team at KRQR in the 1980s. So thank you very much. I also want to recognize my parents who allowed me to be the oddball kid because I was interested in radio and trucks, and all my brothers were active in sports, and they let me be me. And they also gave me a precious gift of self-esteem. And in this business, self-confidence is really the key. And sometimes that self-confidence crosses the line to arrogance. And I'm not apologizing, but I am acknowledging that there were times when I may have seemed arrogant. And part of it is that you can never show weakness in the Shark Tank of radio. And I never asked for permission, and I would apologize when required by the lawyer on the speakerphone. So I want to thank a few more people along the way here, but I also want to tell some stories because it's boring when people just reel off lists of names. And I see a lot of friendly faces here in the room today, and I'm glad you're here, and I appreciate being able to see you again. Now, Peter Laufer mentioned that I got this big break in Chicago, hired for weekends at WBBM FM. Just to be clear, it was a top-rated music station in the 70s. I lasted 2 weekends. I wasn't ready. But I got an air check out of it, and 9 months later, a guy named Ed Shane hired me to do mornings at a suburban station, WGLD in Oak Park. And before I tell this first little anecdote, I want to acknowledge that Tim Burr, after he heard that I had been nominated, said, "You know, Peter, one of the things that I learned from you was how to manage the management." So, Chicago, 1972, my station manager was a greasy little guy, wore cheap suits, chain-smoked Camels, came into the production studio as I'm dubbing a drag strip commercial, and he pulls on his Camel. Oh, and by the way, his name was Charles Manson. True Dad. So Charles Manson pulls on his Camel, and this was the first of the many stories I was told that we had to be afraid of New York. These were faceless executives who we never got to meet, short of a handshake and a pat on the back. And I was told that the following week, Alan Henry, the guy who really runs the company, is coming out from New York. And he looked at me with those beady little eyes and he said, "Peter, we're having a top-to-bottom review." some of us are going to make it, and some of us aren't. That's your Amazon delivery. So I paused, let him have another drag off the camel, and I said, Chuck, I really hope you make it. We both survived. So my next stop was at ABC's WDAI. I'm a 19-year-old kid producing a late-night talk show that fired the host. I take over, and I hit the top of the ratings because of Watergate. I also covered the investigation into the murder of Fred Hampton that revealed the FBI's COINTEL program, which gave me a lifelong obsession with the extremes of the FBI. And my manager there blocked the program director's attempt to fire me three times, so I didn't have to manage that manager. So I came to KOME, and when Lobster crossed the street to KSJO and the story he was trying to tell when the doorbell rang, it created the opening that I was hired for. And we're going to honor KOME later, so I'm going to give it a short shrift. But I loved working there. I had the most musical freedom as a DJ that I ever encountered. And you may know the party boy DJ Gino Michelini. So, I'm not thinking. Ralph told me that if I ever got here, not to worry about the time limit. So, a Friday afternoon, Gino arrives, and he says, Peter, I got some new weed. So we go into the men's room. And you need to understand that KOME was in the same building with K-Bay and Keene. But in between was the office of Congressman Norman Mineta. Now, on Fridays, the congressman typically is in the district. So I had inhaled, and in walks Norm Mineta. So it's a one urinal, one booth facility, so I duck into the booth and close the door and hope that this will pass. But Norm signaled, no, I'm going into the stall. So fortunately, he never mentioned it again. I interviewed him many times, had many encounters with him. And so the next stop was at KGO, and I got a graduate level course in managing the management. In a rare staff meeting of all the talk show hosts, and I'm 26, Jerry Johnson, the Milquetoast program manager, announces that he wants more time checks. And he points to Jim Dunbar and he says, Jim does 51 time checks an hour. So Owen Spann pipes up and says, come on, Jerry. I come on after morning drive, I got to give my listeners a break. Jim Eason just flatly said, no way. Mayor Art Finley said, time checks in the evening, Jerry, that's an invitation for people to tune into television. And Ron Owens just said, I'm on at 10 p.m. and nobody cares what time. So then I got hired at KRQR to do the morning show. I'd been there when it was KCBS FM. And George Sawson came to my house in Palo Alto for lunch the day after we had been sprayed by Jerry Brown's helicopters with pesticides to kill the medflies. He promised me a full-time job starting the next year doing mornings, and I thought he was brilliant. So fast forward to 1985. George took a lateral promotion, and I went to his office to congratulate him. And as I'm leaving, he said, Peter, he said, you are the most difficult person I've ever had to manage. And I said, well, George, I'll take that as a compliment. And as I'm backing out of his office, he said, remember, management fires the last bullet. So I went like this. Fire away. Well, it turns out that morning he had signed the papers to have me and Michael Knight, who was a terrific partner, a very funny man, terminated. The new guy came in, Rod Calarco, and he reversed that. So I actually got fired twice from KRQR. The one in '87 stuck. And I want to acknowledge Sandy Althouse, who's been at KQED for many years, deserves her own place here in the Hall of Fame. She told an off-color joke that by today's standards of, Megan Thee Stallion was really, really tame. And John Evans was the newsman who replaced Michael Knight. He's also the newsman who broke to me the news that I was nominated, and again, the news that I had won. So then I went to X100. That lasted 90 days, but Michael Knight and I reunited, and then Bob Agnew called and hired us at KMBR as a team. And in one of the most difficult moments where I acknowledged that I was unable to manage the management, they fired him in a way that was extremely painful. I went on as a solo act for several years. High points were that I did one of the few liberal interviews with, I was the liberal, but a guy who was a lib interviewing Rush Limbaugh. And while I couldn't puncture the gas bag because he was the big star who preceded me on the air every day, I did point out that he offered racist commentary, and in particular related to Jesse Jackson. And I knew Jesse from Chicago, and when I had a disagreement with Jesse Jackson, I told him to his face. Rush Limbaugh talked back to sound bites of Jesse Jackson. And that is one defining difference. So I will wrap it up here, but I went on to KSFO, and then Ken Dennis, who many people know from KSFO, invited me and Peter Lawfer. We started a show that was on Sirius Left. That segued into a syndicated show that I did for 5 years. We, with a partner, owned a radio station in Monterey, and I had always wanted to be a station owner in the most desperate way, and I succeeded. We bought high and we sold low. It was a great experience. I launched the syndicated show from there, and that paved the way for a podcast that lasted for 11 years till I retired last year, and I was able to attract an international audience with downloads in 71 countries. It was a fascinating experience, very different from the rush that you get from a live broadcast in a mass medium. So I do have to add one more thing, because I want to honor the others who are being honored here today, including Tom Campbell. And I was annoyed by Tom and his table mate, Stephen Matthew David, and Bob Ray was part of the problem, Tom Woods, Sean O'Callahan. These guys were producing so many commercials. And I'd be in the production studio dubbing the 15th Tom Campbell spot for this week, or the 29th top of the hill fucking Daily Signal. But then I learned the magic of co-op. The reason they did all those spots is that everyone was a little different, featuring a slightly different product, so that the advertiser could get reimbursed by the manufacturer. And they showed me the way, and in between radio gigs, I made good money doing commercials, doing what we called industrials in Silicon Valley. I was early in the digital speech game, and one time we were changing planes in Miami, and I heard myself say, "Watch out, the doors are about to close." So I had a great time. I more or less did it my way. And I have one more question. How many people here have an AFTRA pension? Keep your hands up. How many of you sane people, raise your other hand, hated the union? Well, I spent really my entire career on a local board of BAFTA, Chicago, San Francisco, and 11 years on the national board, and I fought for our pension rights the whole way. So, you're welcome. Thank you very much.
I started that pension money already. Next up, our news inductee this year. It takes me a great deal of honor to say the name Holly Quan out loud again, as I've done many times. Holly joins a long list of KCBS journalists among the Barhoff ranks. She's a native of the East Bay, a graduate of Skyline High in Oakland, as well as San Francisco State University, where all the truly great broadcasters matriculate. She is an alumnus. She's an alumnus of Oakland's Youth News. She began her professional career at KQED-FM and is nearing the 25-year mark at KCBS, where she's beloved for her ceaseless efforts as an anchor and reporter, but perhaps more so for her generosity and her skills when it comes to baking. Holly's presenter today is the former chief of the San Francisco Police Department, Greg Sir.
It is a little overwhelming because to say there's a lot of legends in the room would be an understatement. As I was listening to everybody present, it reminded me when I made chief, having been on the dance floor 3 times prior and ended up as a bridesmaid, one of my old mentors, retired captain, said, I guess you learned a valuable lesson that if you just stay in it long enough, the competition either quits or dies. But I'm not here to talk about Lamont Tonelli. So I'm here to introduce Holly Quan. And someone can correct me if I'm wrong, that I believe that Holly will be the first Asian female to be inducted into the Bay Area Hall of Fame. I like to refer to Holly as the Quan. And if you remember Jerry Maguire, Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character explained to Jerry, who was his agent, that the Quan is not just about money. It's about love, respect, community, and the money too. The entire package. That's what the Quan is. Well, Holly Quan may not be rich, but she definitely has the respect, community, and love of her listeners, colleagues, and all those that have had the pleasure to know her, including me. I cannot imagine a morning not having the pleasure to wake up to Holly Quan on the radio. And prior to that, I had the pleasure of waking up to Sting on the radio. Yes. Holly is the second of 2 children. Her sister Heidi couldn't be here. Heidi's an interesting story. The Quans were huge A's and Raider fans, and Heidi was actually named after the Heidi game, Holly tells me. I didn't even know what the Heidi game was. I'm a big football fan. Apparently in 1968, the Raiders were playing the Jets, and huge thrilling game, and at the end of the game, NBC cut to the movie Heidi, and nobody ever saw the end.
I remember that.
So the Quans, being very touched by the birth of their second daughter, named her after football. So anyway, Holly, born and bred in Oakland. Her parents are Raiders season ticket holders. And every Sunday that the Raiders were home, Holly and her sister would go with her parents to the game, but they didn't go to the game on season tickets. Her parents bartered the game to collect recyclables in the parking lot. Wow. So Holly and her sister would dutifully collect cans and bottles, bleaching beer, the whole thing, with specific instructions to lay them by the side of the car. And that's when Holly started to pick up her reporting skills. She told her sister, if we just go to the gate and just look really, really sad, the guard will let us in. And apparently, she saw every single game while her parents were in the suite. She and her sister they owned the guard. And I can tell you firsthand as the chief, if you didn't want to talk, she would just outweight you. She would just be there She was that person. The only other person that was even close to that, God rest him, was Bob Melrose, who was also unbelievable. Holly got her start at radio at 16 years old, interviewing friends at the Oakland-based news magazine Youth News, which means that Holly has been at this for about 40 years. As a reporter in '84, she covered the Democratic National Convention in San Francisco and ended up behind Senator Paul Simon because he needed kids as a backdrop and she looked like she was about 10 years old. While backstage, not to miss an opportunity, she got the autographs of Ed Bradley, Bill Moyers, and the Walter Cronkite. And she's been a reporter for life. In fact, 20 years later, at the Democratic Convention in Boston, she actually got near Bob Schaefer again and could have sworn he turned around. And what I think he was saying, hey, I think that's future Hall of Famer Holly Kwan. No way. Not the first time. Holly came to the city, as Stan said, and went to state. And just 3 days after graduation, she landed her first job as a producer at KQED, spending her off hours drinking Long Island iced teas, sex on the beach cocktails at the Oasis nightclub on 11th Street. I got all this from Holly, by the way. In '89, she covered the earthquake and the Oakland Hills fires. In the mid-'90s, she covered the recovery of a steel magnet that was kidnapped at the Hall of Justice. And her shyness almost resurfaced as she was nervous about cops. She's definitely overcome that with me. Who to talk to, how to write the story. She was trying to figure it out. Ended up working late, went outside, and we had towed her car. Which, I mean, come on, it's a no-brainer. It's the bridge. So, anyway, no matter how angry she was, she got the story filed, and has never been shy ever since. That said, she never misses an opportunity to call bullshit on us towing her car. After a few years at the Express, or as my table calls it, the OJ channel, she switched to her '80s cocktail, the Cosmopolitans, and with the Oscars now. So my recollection of Holly, though, could be spelled out in there was this one event in September of '13. There was just a brutal car crash at about 7 in the morning at Pine and Golf. And I must have been going to a breakfast or something because I was nearby, and so I was like one of the first units there, and it seemed like Holly was already there, which it's 7 in the morning on a Friday. It was kind of crazy. But I was kind of shook by this thing. A little high school student was killed, and his mom and sibling went to the hospital, and Holly actually checked on him, which, I mean, I've done a lot of interviews, and nobody ever checks on me. So Holly, that made a difference. I appreciated that. She was quoted as saying, my privilege to experience firsthand the key moments in Bay Area history, like San Francisco's gay marriage movement, and being able to bring those human stories to our listeners. Whether it's standing in the driving rain so commuters know it's flooded or what's not, or investigating disproportionate cancer rates in Marin County, these are the stories of our communities and ultimately the stories of our lives. So here we are today at Holly's well-earned induction into the Bay Area Hall of Fame as the first Asian female ever. These days she drinks Hemingway, daiquiri, and she says if you don't have a blender, you don't know how to make it. I give you the Kwan.
I know.
I'm going to stick to about as close to 60 seconds as I can. That's the time that I'm used to getting. Put you back on schedule. Thank you so much. I really want to thank people who came before me. That's all of you. Because being a local gal, I probably listened to all of you at some stage of my life. But I really want to thank the people at my table. Stan Bunger, Susan Lee Taylor, John Evans, Steve Baker, people who are previous Hall of Famers. And when you work with such good people, all you try to do is keep up. And you can't help but like have a little of that rub off, and I'm hoping that some of it did. But what I also want to do is point out people like Curtis Kim, Ben Fong Torres, and Dana Jang. Yeah, you don't know me from Adam. Everybody else has worked with you. You don't know me from Adam, but I just have to say, I remember when I was younger and heard your name on the radio. for the first time. And I thought, wow, there's somebody else who's going to disappoint their parents by not becoming. This is just to say that you don't know who you're going to end up influencing in a really positive way just by being on the radio and just by being yourself. And for you, it was me, a little kid who didn't know that radio was even possible. And here I am. So thank you so much.
Holly, the desk just told me once to refile, it would have been 3. Our next inductee, Tom Campbell, is being inducted because it made no sense to have a Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame without Tom Campbell in it. Tom is being inducted in our legend category, and truly, we've already heard a bit about it today. We'll hear some more in a moment, but anybody who has been in this part of America, somewhere in the last half century or so, has heard and knows the story, some of it, of Tom Campbell. Here to tell more is his presenter and fellow Bay Area Radio Hall of Famer, Ben Fong Torres.
I'll have a blue. Wrong luncheon. Sorry. Time warp. That's right. Mind warp. All right. Good afternoon. So good to see you. I'm here to induct tall Tom Campbell into the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame in the legend category. I am short, Ben Fong Torres, and when I was even shorter, I was a big fan of Top 40 radio, and here in the Bay Area we had extraordinary DJs, many who would move on. Gary Owens, Casey Kasem, Michael Jackson, Johnny Holiday, the real Don Steele. In that field of great personalities, few students taller than Tom Campbell. At one point, it was the fall of 1969, his evening show on KYA polled 31% of the teen listening audience. Next best was KFRC with 20. And as Tom noted, KYA operated on 1,000 watts at nighttime, while KFRC had 10 times as much power. He did it with a combination of natural vocal and reading skills. He sometimes speed read, but without the screaming or louding style of typical Top 40 jocks. He was persuasive, and he came across as a DJ who cared about his listeners. Really cared. He gave out his home phone number and answered it. There he is. He offered to let fans borrow his portable stereo system and records. They could even borrow his car. He was nuts. He also became known for his delivery of commercials for Matthews TV and Stereo City, Top of the Hill, Daly City, and that would lead to a fulfilling post-DJ career and to the White House. But first, a brief bio. Tom was born and raised in the St. Louis area, where as a kid he got hooked on broadcasting. At age 12, he built a low-power AM station that he remembers reached a couple of blocks, kind of like Peter B. Collins. By the way, the B now stands for Barbieri. Tom was also a ham radio operator. He impressed a local station with his voice and enthusiasm and got to do station IDs on weekends. After serving in the Air Force, where he studied electronics, he began his climb, station by station, to San Francisco and to KYA. That was 1967. After about 4 years of great success, he had a contract dispute with the boss, who Tom says reneged on a promised raise. Can you imagine that? He left and worked at KNEW and KLOK. But it was a weekend talk show back on KYA, along with his experience with TV and stereo retailers, that would put him on the road to Washington. On his talk show, he invited his listeners to write an essay for a contest about a debate he staged with LSD guru Timothy Leary and Jeff Donfeld, author of Richard Nixon's drug policy. Soon, Bud Wilkinson, another advisor to Richard Nixon, asked Tom for help reaching teenagers, and Tom formed and chaired a youth advisory committee comprised of top 40 DJs from 8 markets around the country. From there, his experience with broadcasting and technology led to his serving as a technology advisor for every president, from George W. Bush to Barack Obama, and for numerous party conventions. He was a bipartisan tech wizard. And in September of 2001, led an overhaul with a team of engineers and installers of the Roosevelt Room next to the Oval Office. They finished replacing all the outmoded communications and conferencing equipment just 3 days before the terrorist attacks of September 11. The Roosevelt Room became the nerve center of White House operations. And thanks to Tom and his team, it was state of the art. He would later receive, I didn't think I'd get one. He would later receive the Distinguished Service Award from Bush for dedicated service to the White House and the Executive Office of the President following the attacks on the United States of America. Tom also has a commendation from President Clinton, and he's been inducted into 2 technology-related Halls of Fame. And he is still working. He is the Chief Technologist and Corporate Director for the experiential retailer Video and Audio Center, helping launch the latest tech projects. He just keeps on rolling. Please welcome into the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame, the still tall Tom Campbell.
Hey, Ben, can you hear me? Ben, thank you so much. They said I had 20 minutes to speak, but I'll give you some, okay? But thank you so much. I'm so touched because the honor really is all of you here. You really are the legends. I don't want to cheer up here, but the biggest, for my career, was San Francisco, the Bay Area, no question. This was the most in-demand market for talent anywhere in the nation. And we all had offers. Chicago, New York, I was at WLS for 1 weekend, and I said, no, I'm coming back. I went back to KYA. WMCA in New York. We have people like, I mean, you name it. Chris Edwards, God bless his soul, who was honored here a few years ago. I was here for that. But you know, Jim Lang, remember the dating game? Yeah. Well, Jim's the one that got me into TV. He called me to, you'd be a good game show host. Me? Forget it. So I went to meet Chuck Barris. So I went down to LA and I got a TV show. I couldn't believe it. But really, the story is radio. It's so powerful today. There's no question. Stephen Matthew, David, where are you? 6400 Mission, where? Wait, Steve, stand up. 1016. Steve, top of the hill, where? Daly City. Absolutely. And I tell you, it was unbelievable. I'm one of the few DJs on every station except Tom Donahue at KSAN refused to air my spots. I couldn't believe it. No. Stephen demanded we had to be on at least 3 times an hour to 4 times an hour on every station. And we were. Live equals from the top of the hill, Daly City. Matthews, because of Stephen and radio, not me, became the #1 single location independent retailer in the nation. And today it's marked as a historical landmark. There's a plaque at 6400 Mission Street that says top of the hill. A national landmark. It shows you the power of radio. Hey, you look at those that pulled away from radio. You ever hear of Fry's Electronics? Oh, yeah. They used to be on radio, they pulled off, and a year later, where are they? Circuit City, on and on and on. But radio really works. And I'll tell you, we have a company, Video and Audio Center, not to get a commercial there. But the point is, we are on 7 of the top radio stations in LA. 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And that company with 5 stores is the #1 independent chain in California and just got rated #3 for the entire nation. Because of radio, 90% of the budget's on radio. So those that are using radio, like Sit and Sleep and other companies, are very, very successful. And so I looked up, Nielsen had mentioned, by the way, just to share something for a second, and by the way, Peter Collins, thank you for hating my commercials. I'll get even. But, you know, it's interesting because of what Nielsen was saying. I just want to read this here. It's very interesting. the total money spent advertising on terrestrial radio was over $13.5 billion this past year, okay? They're saying that people spend $10 for every dollar spent on the radio. So you multiply that, that's $135 billion added to our economy because of radio. We had an earthquake in LA last week, okay? The TV went out. You can't wait for the next day for a newspaper. I've got that portable emergency radio. People tune into radio to hear what's going on. There's an emergency. You go to the radio. So I see a very bright future, not just for today, but for tomorrow, because radio really rules. So thank you so much for this honor. It really is heart-touching, and you are the legends right here in this room. Thank you.
All right, Tom Campbell. I've been invited to just say a few words and let you know that there is a documentary that is out now about me called what's it called? Like a Rolling Stone, A Life in Time. And it premiered at the Tribeca in June. It'll be at the Middle Valley Film Festival, October 10th and 11th. It's going to play in Los Angeles this weekend on Sunday. And so I just want to let you know about it so you won't be surprised when you hear about it. I hope you're able to see it. It's about my career, not only at Rolling Stone, but absolutely also on the radio. A joy. Thank you very much.
A very quick story. You know, I spent many years with John Madden on the air, and one morning, kicking it around with John, I said, yeah, you and John Robinson, the legendary Rams and USC coach, you guys really put Daly City on the map. And Madden says, no, we didn't put Daly City on the map. That guy who sold the TVs on the top of the hill. Next inductee, Dennis Terry. Denny, for Jones. Joyce Barhoff in the Pioneer category, selected by the Bay Area Radio Museum Board of Directors. I dare say nobody in this room, there are a lot of stories in this room, that has once spiked like Denny's. Among other things, he was involved in the phone freaking movement of the 60s and 70s when clever people figured out how to avoid long distance charges. I think sometimes using a whistle, you got out of a box of cereal. Don't worry, Danny, the statute of limitations has expired on that. He's operated a pirate radio station, spun records on the long-gone Wascatto station KTAO, continues a regular gig at KSJS on the San Jose State campus. Denny's presenter is longtime Monterey County broadcaster Mark Carbonaro, who I just missed at West Valley College. Mark?
Denny, you want to use the yellow or the blue mic? So, this guy I have known for almost 50 years. And we go back to San Jose, where we were both born and raised. I became aware of him in the early to mid-70s, when this guy was working as an unpaid consultant for Pacific Bell and AT&T, demonstrating pioneering methods of making free telephone calls. Now, this was such a top secret and clandestine project, even the phone company didn't know about it. You going to talk about George Alex today?
Oh, yeah.
But at that time, I discovered that DT, as we call him, and my older sister were school friends from Blackford Grammar School?
No, we went to catechism of all things.
Oh, that's St. Christopher. Okay. There you go. We're getting the deep details here. But I didn't personally meet him until much later. When I was in high school at Leland, we had a 10-watt non-commercial station. I'm doing a show one afternoon. The request line is ringing, and I answer it, and I hear, "Hey, buddy." And that was Denny, listening to me on the radio and introducing himself. And from that point on, we discovered we had a common interest in broadcasting.
and radio jingles and telephone, and we just became fast friends. And Denny knew everything about radio and still does. You know, in those days, I know the engineers in the room are familiar with this, but radio stations used to have to do something called an audio proof. And this guy would stay up at night listening to the audio proof on the station. You know, that's like a 1,000, you hear those weird tones in the middle of the night, Denny's listening to it. And he's calling the radio station to talk to the engineer who's doing the proof. Hello, KLOK. He's talking to Dave Evans, you know. Dave called him the man with the golden hair. He says, hey Dave, is that a 1,000 cycle tone at 0 dB? Oh, yes it is. Who is this anyway? But he really was the radio expert. And when I became program director of a radio station in Monterey in 1982, I needed disc jockeys, and Denny helped me find talent. That's how we got Mark Furr, right? We were referral.
Yeah, Mark Furr, the Kirby Booster Radio.
That's right. And then I always wanted to put him on the air, but the boss I worked for, the guy was kind of, well, I don't know if you're going to put a blind guy on the air, you know, what's going to happen, everything like that. And it's a frightening problem. Yeah, it was for him, you know, but I finally convinced him it would be okay, because I got tired of getting woken up in the middle of the night, being told that the overnight jock on the weekend shift quit and didn't come in. And that means the PD has to get in his car and drive in and do the show. So I said, I need someone who's going to do the show. They're going to do a great job. And like Denny said, I don't care if it's the middle of the night, it's always dark for me. and so I was able to prevail on my boss to hire this guy. And I said, listen, he'll come down here, he's got a buddy that'll drive him, who will be his board op and pull the music. This guy works for Gabbard at K101. He's a great board op. Your radio station will sound better between midnight and 6 on Sunday morning than it sounds during the week. And the boss went along with it, and we put him on the air. And I'll tell you what, Denny was fabulous. He was a PD's dream because he showed up on time for every shift. He never fell asleep, at least when I was working there.
I'll tell a story about that.
Yeah, you'll have a story about that. I wasn't there then, so you know. But anyway, it worked out great, and I'm just so proud to be his friend and to be able to present to you in the Pioneer category, Mr. Dennis Teresi. Denny, sir. Got 5 minutes? Keep it light, keep it tight, get it right, and be sure to lock out with the station calling.
Yeah, that's right. I don't want to talk too much, as a lot of PDs have told me not to do over the years. No, thanks very much, Mark. Mark actually helped me out. He got me helped me get 3 different jobs, actually, down at the Monterey base. So I owe quite a bit to him, and we'll have thanks for a few more people in a few minutes. But I'll kind of briefly mention the all-night hours, I guess, be a pretty big part of my life. Because as a kid, I would stay up all night, a lot of the time listen to Russ the Moose, and probably fall asleep at school, school off and on. But yeah, I had to do over again. I had to do it the same way. I was Douglas to Russ the Moose, and of course the KYA later, KSFO, and the all-night hour was a big part of my life, not only listening, but for the first few years in radio, I did a lot of all-night stuff. I did 5 nights a week, all nights at KSJS in 77. But we'll fast forward ahead to Monterey. We just touched on that 1986 I'll tell you about. It was kind of funny. 35 years ago. I was working for Les Turpin. Some of you, I'm sure you probably know who Les Turpin is. Les Turpin, interim PD at KFRC in 67. He was a PD at WCBS at that time in New York. He did some pretty big time stuff. But he was kind of on the way down, so to speak, and was kind of retired in Monterey, so he was the PD at KNRY. So I came in on a Friday night, an hour early. They needed me to come in at 11, so I've been on the air for 6 hours, 11 to 5. Then I had to run Dick Park's Rock, Roll, and Remember, which in those days was distributed on albums. So, so I've been on the air 6 hours, so we get to Rock, Roll, and Remember. And it's about 5:13. I thought, well, I don't have to do anything for about 14 more minutes, so maybe I'll just kind of lie down and rest for a couple of minutes. Fatal mistake. I woke up and I hear the record in the runout groove, and I checked my watch. It's 2.5 minutes to 6. And holy crap! I missed the whole second half.
missed the second half hour of hour one, so I had to quickly regroup and figure, well, do I run that now, or do I just skip hour two, and that way, my relief, by the way, my relief coming in was the PD, Les Turpin. I don't know if I'm going to get away with this, but I don't know if I'm going to get away with this, but let's give it a shot. I'll run hour number two, and when he comes in, I won't say anything, and if he says something, I'll have to own up to it. And so a couple of minutes, he came in, we talked for a couple of minutes, and he said, well, I guess you fell asleep a little bit earlier. So I started profusely apologizing to him, and Les was laughing, and he said, I'll tell you what, I tuned by about 5:30, and I heard the dead air, and so I figured, well, I guess Denny fell asleep, so I went ahead and went to Denny's and had breakfast anyway. So it was, that was a fun story, but I got to wrap things up here, and I'm running over probably. But we'll give you a few thanks to a few people. Thanks, of course, to Mark, as I mentioned a moment ago. Mark C. Giving me helping me out to get several jobs in the Monterey Bay. And I also want to thank Ross Hartman. Maybe we can get him to stand up. I know he's here today. Ross has been my partner in crime probably since 1979. Partners at a record store, and helped me out. Helped me out for a lot of years with the shows at KSJS. He does all kinds of behind the scenes research, and I wouldn't say he makes me sound a lot better than I really am. So I'll send out thanks to him. And let's also thank all the people from the Barhoff Board of Directors, my buddy Len Shapiro, and of course David Jackson, and Bill Compton, and Steve Cushman. Have I left anybody else? Mike Adams, of course. Yeah, yes, obviously. Yeah, I got a special thanks to Mike Adams. Steve and Mike kind of made this whole thing possible for me this year. I assume they don't have the recognition that a lot of people do here, but haven't had nearly as long a career as a lot of the folks. So I'm quite honored to be inducted into the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame. In fact, the pioneer position, you have people like Mark Davis and Gil Haar, and my goodness, I could dig into Spectrum did that, so I'm truly honored to be inducted into the Hall of Fame this year. So I just want to thank the Board of Directors from Barhoff, and we'll put the wrapper on, and glad everybody can come up today and have a great weekend.
All right, Danny Terry. Next up, we call it the specialty category, and in the case of our inductee, Dana Jang, it sort of refers to everything, because that's what Dana has done. He's an alumnus at Foothill College and Santa Clara University, and while still in college, was part of the group that launched Cupertino's KKUP, which is now in its 50th year on the air. It's great to see that the KKUP represented today. Dana has been an on-air personality, a program director, and an awful lot more, and apparently an inspiration to Holly Club, which is a touching part of today's get-together. His resumes included KONE, KSJO, Live 105, and Dana's presenter is longtime KFOX personality Chris Jackson.
Okay, the first time I worked for Dana, he told me, whatever you do when you talk, make sure it's 30 seconds or less. So here we go. I got 26 seconds left here. How am I doing? So I want to introduce to you the guy that gave me the #1 tip that I have used on the radio my whole career, and he gave it to me when I was 11 years old, and I made a request on KOME, and Dana Jang picked up the phone, and I said to him, hey, can you play Aerosmith, Draw the Line? Now this was not a big hit. I didn't know they don't play it, you know. And he said to me, I'll see what I can do. Well, he never played Aerosmith.
I've been using that for 30 years.
So, yeah, would you play it now, Dana? If I brought you on the KFOX Morning Show, would you introduce it? No, But I think I just used that line for 2 callers this morning. I'll see what I can do. So I'm still using it. But thank you for hiring me. There's so many people in here that were hired by Dana Jang.
And fired.
So, but I knew him first as an on-air personality. He's known now more as the boss. But man, growing up and listening to KOME, I'm going to introduce him using the first name he used on the air. I just found this out tonight. Presenting Dana Jang, formerly Dave J.
Paul Lobster Wells and Peter McCollins, who we both all worked at KOME together, and of course Lamont Antonelli, who happened to be the major success of what we had at KSJO in the 90s. And I'm really impressed by Lamont's show prep ability. I couldn't add up all the years, and number two, I can't rank my general managers. I have to tell you, my favorite general managers are in the room. John Leathers and David Barenfeld, and I have to add a couple more. Number one is Bob Keith, who Empire Broadcasting really instilled to me the power of San Jose radio. And I will always owe that to Bob Keith forever, and I'm really impressed by the turnout today, especially acknowledge Joan Dennis Hamilton, who really helped turn out the school. And also the power of rock and roll, and one of my general managers in KSJO was John Sutherland, so we really had a great deal going for us at KSJO in the 90s. So I want to acknowledge all those general managers, and I also wanted to talk about my family, who really kind of endured my passion in radio early. When I was growing up, the thing that drew me to radio, and I have to relate to Marty Lurie, was baseball. At the time, the San Francisco Giants and the LA Dodgers moved west, and I was in Southern California at the time, and the magic of Vin Scully telling a story on the Dodgers drew me to radio, and at the same time, the transistor radio was developed, so radio became very mobile. And I was able to take radio to school with me and listen to the World Series, and I have radio in my backyard as I was playing with my pitchback. And I also had to go through a lot of bad bubble gum to collect Topps baseball cards. My brother was a lot smarter than me. He looked at the comic books, the classified section, and ordered the whole Major League teams, and I had to endure a lot of sugary bubble gum, which is really bad. So my passion in radio developed very early in life. I actually tried to do the first radio remote from Palo Alto. I had my brother stay up all night with me on the Russ the Moose Syracuse KYA all-night flight, and I had him play 96 Years by Question Mark and the Mysterians. Unfortunately, Russ the Moose bombed him after a couple of seconds, but that didn't hurt my brother. He became a very accomplished jazz musician. My sister had to endure me reading the newspaper every day to practice my news reading abilities, and of course that kind of inspired her to become editor of the high school newspaper, the Catamount, and of course she did a very good job editing that. But one of the main things that I really enjoyed was the time that I spent listening to the great rock radio stations of San Jose. And again, Bob Keith comes up, and the name Captain Mikey comes up. When I was going to high school, I was listening to KYA and KEWB because they reminded me of some LA radio stations, KFWB and KRLA. But sometime in high school, the surf sound came about, and the KLIV sticker with Norman on a surfboard, and they were doing surfing safaris over to Santa Cruz, and also they were playing music like my friend Ken Elmer, Count 5, Syndicate of Sound, People. They were playing San Jose garage bands. And I started listening to KLIV and Captain Mikey, and years later, Captain Mikey became one of my radio mentors at KOME. And so I really cherish that, and that's why here today we're the biggest turnouts. It has a lot to do with the power of San Jose radio. And, again, I'm quite honored, and I was really impressed by Lamont Hollywood's, adding up all the years that everybody's been around. I didn't go that far, adding up all the years. But, I do want to thank my mother. She was the major force in me getting an on-air job. What happened was she went shopping one summer to the Mayfield Ball in Mountain View. She came home and she handed me the slip of paper. She said, call this name and this phone number. And I said, why? She said, I ran into this radio station doing a remote at the Mayfield Ball. And so I called that radio station up. It was Pinewood Private Schools, KPSR, at 91.5, which was the forerunner of KKUP. I called them up and they put me on the air, and that's where I used the name Dave J. And of course, years later, a guy came on, Dave Hurd, and he had to use Don Hurd, because I always took Dave J. And one of the reasons why I took Dave J was I was kind of embarrassed playing Top 40 radio. But I also like to thank my uncle, Roland, who supplied me with Memorex tape while he was VP of Memorex. I spent just tons of tape just taping all these radio shows. And years later, my uncle Roland was also very instrumental in helping me put KKUP on the air. He got me in contact with a foundation in Menlo Park that gave us the grant to buy a transmitter for KKUP. And see, I was very fortunate enough to have three great program directors who trained me. Doug Drost, who was the guy who first put me on the air in Morning Drive at KSJO. And that's no big deal, because in those days, the rock audience slept in. So that was Ann Colbeck, who appointed me music director, and I have to tell you that being music director of KOME was such a great experience, because it exposed me to all this great rock music that was coming out in the 70s, and a lot of great relationships with people in the music industry. And finally, Michael Hunter at KOME, who really gave me an idea of the power of radio imaging and crazy, innovative promotions. And it was a thrill to work for Michael through the years at KOME, and I took a lot of his schooling to work at my future programming jobs. And so in closing, I want to say one thing. I really enjoyed working with everybody in this room and listening to everybody in the room. And I have to borrow a phrase from the late, great Lori Roberts. I'm putting another one on the shelf for Lefty.
Everyone. Next up, our management inductee. And, you know, management takes its fair share of lumps in our business, but this is one of the really good guys, Bill Luke. The phrase Renaissance man certainly applies. He holds a master's degree in opera performance. He's an accomplished trumpet player. He's been an on-air personality and newscaster, and has the singular accomplishment of having led classical music KDFC to become at times the top-rated music format station in the Bay Area. Bill later led the effort to save KDFC from format change, created a non-profit partnership with the University of Southern California. Bill Luke's presenter, one of his longtime colleagues at KDFC, herself a Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame member, Diane Nicolini.
Thank you so much, Stan. Thanks, everybody. Great to see you. And yeah, what I'm doing now, I'm going to take my speech and just read every other paragraph. So it'll be short, but it won't make any sense. So, you know, Bill and I met 31 years ago at KKHI. He was hired on as an announcer at that moment. And you know, he's an amazing announcer. He could be in the Hall of Fame as an announcer. Great pipes, as Lou Sinclair used to say. And he became program director there within months. Then it was sold, and then we both ended up at KDFC, and between those two stations, Bill did a stint at KPIX and CBS, and anchored the all-day, everyday coverage of the O.J. Simpson trial. Fun factoid, yeah. So at KDFC, that was where Bill pursued his mission of pushing the envelope and changing the classical format forever and for good. And we started doing things that a regular radio station does. And his quote is, we are not a classical radio station, but a radio station that happens to play classical music. So we did fun things like top 100 countdowns and phone trivia contests, had a morning zoo, really, with Hoyt Smith and Betsy O'Connor and Dusty Rhodes, and John Evans was part of that team. I mean, that's a lot of Hall of Famers, all under the leadership of Bill Booth. Bill loves a crisis, it seems, or he sees crises as opportunities. And as Stan mentioned, we had the first big crisis when Entercom cut us loose, and we transitioned to being a public radio station. And I said, but I don't want to go on the air and beg for money. And Bill said, you know, it's going to be okay. In fact, it might be the best thing that ever happened to us. And after 10 years of being a public radio station, we have a combined audience with our sister station, KUSC in Los Angeles, of 1 million listeners a week. So, yeah. I want to just say that Bill is a really nice guy, even-tempered, patient, and kind. And I'll make John Leathers sweat here. One time we were having, I think, like Christmas lunch at the station, and I was going to track a couple hours so I could attend. And I don't know what I did to the board, but I left the wrong pot up or down. We missed 2.5 hours of paid commercials. And so I had to sheepishly go up to Bill and say, this happened. And he said, well, we're going to have to do a lot of make goods. And he, you know, I've never heard him raise his voice. He's never yelled. He's just a kind, wonderful guy to work with. And one final opportunity/crisis, fairly recently, a couple years ago, we found out we were going to have to find a new home. We were at 3rd and Howard with Entercom, and that lease was up. And so Bill somehow got wind of the fact that the San Francisco Conservatory of Music was going to build a new building directly across the street from Davies Symphony Hall, and he managed to get us in on the ground floor. Actually, we're on the 2nd floor, and it's amazing. And after years of work, raising and spending a ton of money, we started broadcasting live from that space 4 days ago on Tuesday. So the next chapter in the almost 75-year history of KDFC is underway in a great way, due in huge part to the visionary Bill Booth. So please raise your glasses to a great leader, a wonderful manager, and my great friend, Bill Booth.
Comment is part of how this all works, I think, but was that Beethoven I was hearing? I know I requested Bad Bunny as my walk-up music. And by the way, I know when a classical guy gets up here, this is the part we start to stretch things out a little bit at the end. Listen to longer pieces, so we've got some time on our hands. So I hope you don't ding-dong me too many times. In fact, Diane and I were talking about this event has turned into like a Mahler symphony. If you've made it this far, you might as well stick it out. Thank you, KOME, because you all stuck it out. This KOME, you know, I've got connections to so many people in this room. As a classical guy, I didn't start out as a classical guy. This thing about the opera, yeah, I ended up in that because I wanted to be a rock and roll singer. I wanted to be Greg Kihn, and I tried to be Greg Kihn, almost, more rock band like. But, you know, around that same time, and when I went to college, I wanted to be in the choir, but I was singing in garage bands, and the choir director said, I tell you what, I'll give you a full ride, but you have to be a music major. So
So I call my parents and say, I'm not going to be a business major. And they go, you love music, just get a degree. You know, the advice that nobody ever hears. Yes, honey, be a music major. Well, I ended up going to grad school as a music major, as an opera singer. And there I got the radio bug and took a left turn and never looked back. My lovely wife, Wendy, I'm the eye candy to my beautiful wife, Wendy, she's the one that got us to San Francisco. So I had just started in radio in that giant market, I think it was 296 of Lincoln, Nebraska. And she said, honey, I have to go to San Francisco for my opera career. And I said, well, I'll find something. And I got lucky in 1989, right, 2 weeks after the earthquake. I landed a job on the same station as the beautiful young Diane Nicolini. I was the morning host, she was middays. And then that station got sold, and I thought, now what do we do? And I remember Wendy, you and I were talking in the car. Many of you can relate to this. Your radio careers, you never felt like they were permanent, so you couldn't plan anything. But you go, why don't we do this? Well, why don't we invest in that? We should move there. I'm like, we can't, honey. I don't know how long I'll be here. 31 years later, still here, and knock on wood, not been unemployed. Had a lot of different jobs, but always employed. But then went on to work at somebody lovingly called it the OJ station. Some of you may remember Bill Mann called it the bus, because he hated that station. The Express became the bus. Holly, you probably remember that. John was there, and Susan Lee Taylor, and for a second, Peter B. was there. The one thing I learned there was I want to be in music radio. That's the biggest lesson I got out of that. I am a music guy. I love music. I'm so thrilled to be part of music. So when I went back to KDFC, I was gifted truly by the company to say, Bill, we know you want a mainstream classical radio. We're going to give you real radio investment. You can hire talent. I started hiring talent other than the great Diane Nicolini, who were not classical people. Boyd Smith, John Evans, the great Ray White, and many others who became jocks on that station, and are now some of them in the Hall of Fame. And then it went so well, as it was mentioned, it became the #1 music station twice in the Bay Area as a classical station. So what does the company do? Hey, Bill, how about something else? You can go back to your roots of doing some other kind of music. So I oversaw, get this title, not only VP of Operations, but Director of Innovation and Strategic Creativity. That was the title. I knew I was bound for management at that point. Once my business card got more like a sash. So I got to oversee the Bear. I love country music for a couple of years there. We switched it to Max FM. That was a blast with the creative 70s, 80s pop format. We loved doing that with the creative geniuses that had a fun time doing that. And then along came Entercom, and they made the trade to keep Hoyt, KDFC, and switch Max to the Wolf. So I talked to the VP, senior VP of Bonneville, saying, what are we going to do? I would like to stay doing some of these other formats, not just classical. I didn't like being tagged always as a classical guy. So this guy, we're having a drink, and he said, you know what, Bill? You're effed. You'll always be the classical guy. That's how people think of you, no matter what format you've been involved in. You're the classical guy. So I thought, okay, Entercom wanted me to keep it classical for those years. So when they switched it out, and Diane's right, when they decided to flip it to classic rock, I fired everybody and then hired half the team back, and have many said the same thing she did. Oh my gosh, now we have to fundraise. And I said, but that's people love you when they send you a check voluntarily. Isn't that what we all want? It's not just ratings. We actually want people to go, I love you so much, I'm sending you money, and I don't even know you. So that's been a huge success for us. Mr. John Leathers joined us running the sales team, the sponsorship team. So many great people have worked with that. I was hoping I'd make it. Could I at least get some classical music? Yes. That's funny. Keep going, Bill. Keep going. So at the end of the day, I actually I've had enough. Not normally this long-winded as most of my friends know, but it's just so much fun to be here and think that when I started doing this, I never imagined this. That I'd have a career that would go not only being a DJ, but everybody said, you sound like you should be on the radio. I hated to hear that when I was young. I really did. I'm like, I'm a musician. I'm not going on the dance, right? And here we are in the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame. So thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Eric Steinberg is our next inductee. He joins Bar Hop in the engineering category, having been selected by the Bay Area chapter of the Society of Broadcast Engineers. Eric's long and varied career in Bay Area broadcasting includes time as chief engineer at KGO, vice president and general manager at KTFC, and director of technical operations for the Susquehanna Cumulus cluster and the Giants and 49ers radio networks. Eric's presenter actually knows all of these details very well. It's his wife, Mary.
Well, I got a new name today. I'm not Mary, and I'm not Steinberg. I'm Lisa Miller. So, but I am his wife for 37 years. So I'm in healthcare, and I just want to say that there are a lot of commonalities between healthcare and this room. It's a service industry, and I just want to say that I have been the recipient of your services all of my life since I was a little kid and heard radio on my turquoise transistor the first time. So thank you to all of you. Before you all exit, I do want, and before Bill Luth, I know you said this was your last thing, but I want Bill to hear, I received an email from Dwight Walker. And Dwight Walker says, I'm sorry that I can't be with you today. I've had the privilege of working with many of the inductees in this room, and I congratulate all of you Hall of Famers. But today I want to say how proud I am of Bill Luth and Eric Steinberg. They both exemplify the very best in their radio professional careers, and more importantly, as good human beings. And I think you heard that in the introduction to Bill as well, and I will underscore that for my husband. Some of my best years in radio were spent with these two gentlemen, and I congratulate them in the recognition of their contributions to Bay Area radio. Sincerely, Dwight Walker. I also had a paragraph that I will eliminate very quickly, but I did want to tell you that I am in healthcare, and the first time I met Eric, which was many years ago, he had a beeper on his bathing suit. We met at the condo at the pool. And I just assumed he was a doctor. I had no idea he was a very nerdy engineer who loves radio more than anything in the world. We've had giant transistors in our basement, and he probably has 500 radios, I don't know. I want you to know that he currently is part-time, and he devotes his time to many, many things, including, you may have heard of Blue Bear Music. He fixes radios and amps and guitars and all sorts of stuff that are donated to children who are interested in music. So I did want to share that. I knew he was the right guy for me when in Houston we had a hurricane and lightning struck my condominium and blew up my television. And he came up and fixed it. And then he really sealed the deal when he asked me for our first date, which was a flight in his little Cessna. We're taking off on a Houston runway. It was probably 109 degrees and the humidity was 90%. As he zoomed off the runway, the cows were dispersing and I'm sweating to death. And I said, Eric, where's the air conditioning? And in his very calm, engineering, thoughtful, kind voice, he said, upper right-hand corner, pull out the cylinder. I pull out this silver cylinder, thinking it was the air conditioning, and it was clearly a vent, which was full of a wasp family. They all flew and began to attack me, and of course, in my very calm way, I started screaming. At which point, he reaches across me,
puts his hand on the handle of the door of the plane. I'm meanwhile thinking I'm going to get sucked out. He pushes with all his might, opens the door as we're heading over the treetops in Houston. And I start screaming again, at which point, though, I was the only wasp not sucked out of the air. I turned and looked at him and said, he's pretty competent. And that was the flicker of our first love. 37 years of marriage, 2 children, and a brand new grandbaby.
Oh, nice.
I still love him. I still think you are the most precious, honorable man that I know.
No, I'm not a rebel, but I'll explain why I chose that as the walk-up song later. Wow, thank you, Lisa. Anyhow, I'm so honored to share the stage with so many wonderful people, some of them who I've known for decades, and some I've met today. And at first, I was wondering why you would even want to honor an engineer. But then I figured it out. You needed an engineer to bring you some Hollywood razzle-dazzle. Celebrity appeal to this occasion. You needed someone from the world of broadcast and engineering, America's sexiest profession. By the way, if you need another engineer to spice up next year's festivities, here's how you can identify him or her. The engineer's the one who set up the sound system at their senior prom instead of bringing a date. The engineer's the person at the meeting who, without being asked, rushes up to fix the microphone if it doesn't work. And the engineer is the one whose office has a wall calendar featuring the radio tower of the month. Sadly, that's true. Seriously, I had such a wonderful, fun, and fulfilling career in radio. And receiving this award is a wonderful gift that I will always treasure. I had other jobs in the course of my life, but radio was, and always has been, the heart of my career and the career of my heart. Every single day, I loved going to work with the many wonderful and talented people who work in the wonderful world of radio every single day. And the plaque. This plaque will have a place of honor in Lisa's and my home, and every day it will remind me of the best years of my life and you. And if you'll indulge me, I need to say just a few thanks. First, to my grandmom, Mary, who gave me a crystal radio kit when I was 11 years old. It ignited my imagination and gave me a purpose. My introductory song, He's a Rebel by the Crystals, is the first song that came out of the first radio. I want to thank also Mickey Luckoff and Ron Denman, who brought me to the Bay Area almost 4 decades ago. And thanks to Tony Salvador, is he still here, Tony? And Dwight Walker, who supported me at my final broadcasting experience at KFOG KNBR, The Ticket and the Bone. I also want to thank Len Shapiro, Paul Marks, and Steve Cushman, and the SVE Chapter 40 for the nomination and encouragement. And now you know why I'm not a disc jockey. Finally, to my wife and Lisa, for supporting me each and every day with her love and understanding. I love her, and I love radio. Thank you.
And you know what? We made it before dinner time, so I promise. Finally, we round things out today, presenting the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame legendary station for 2021, San Jose's KOME. You know, as a kid who grew up in the Santa Clara Valley in the 70s, I can tell you this. You were not cool unless you had first the KLIV surf sticker and then the KOME decal on your car. Better yet, you had it on your dad's car, because that meant you talked dad into putting the decal on his car, and you got extra points if you got an X-Acto knife and creatively rearranged. We have several KOME alums here today, obviously, and here to salute our legendary station will be led by Jonah Dance Hamilton, and Jonah's going to introduce you to some other folks, I assume. Jonah?
I have to use the black and yellow one, right? Okay. Am I loud enough? Am I good? Here? Okay. All right. Well, I'm Jonah Dance Hamilton. I work on 94.5 Bay FM now. I've been there for over 25 years. But yeah, I got my start pretty much at KOME. And I want to say the Lobster, when we go way back to when I was in college, we were rivals there. KFJC for me and KZSU for him, and then we ended up at KOME and KSJO doing the same thing again. And also Lobster, when he left in bicentennial weekend, July of 1976, he vacated a spot, and that's what got me full-time. We got moved up on KOME to full-time, so thank you. It's a really great thing. So, I also want to mention that Tom Campbell, such an impressive guy, loved your speech. And Tom, we met in the late 70s. You came by. Where is Tom right now? Okay. So Tom, you came by KOME. There was a contest because of your spots, and you said some people didn't like them so much. KOME listeners were kind of, and you won Turkey of the Year. You came by thinking you were going to get an award, and the award was, as you walked through the parking lot, and we were all outside, pie in the face. I mean, not just pie in the face, but like roped up the nose. And Tom, you were such a good sport. Nobody knew how you were going to take this, and you just laughed it off.
Well, it tasted good.
And then I still remember, because I'm just getting started in professional radio, and you said, you're going to be at KFRC someday. And I'm like, okay. But that was 40-some years ago. Yeah. So just very impressive. And by the way, also, Tom, I've heard some stories from people personally that have encountered you over the years, and they're such good. They really, really appreciate the person that you are. So that's Tom. We're back here at 98.5 KOME. I just want to kind of start off here by saying KOME is #1. How can you say that? We are afraid! It's one of our favorite slogans from our boss, Michael Hunter, and the last string of craziness that we had. And actually, I have, you guys should come up here that are going to be doing some narration here. We laboriously put together some pictures that came out to a half hour long. That was redone, so it's now 8 minutes. And we are going to try and do our best to watch this and say a few things as it's, is it running already? Okay, well, we're going to need to go to the, we'll just wing it here. So we're already on Dennis Arrakis there. But we're going to start from the beginning. You saw some pictures of the very first of some really hippie-looking guys, and that was the early 1971 era. And Gary T., why don't you come up here? This is Gary Torsani. Gary was there in the beginning years.
Yeah, I'm Gary T. KOME, your friendly neighborhood midday guy for a lot of years in the 70s and 80s. KOME started in the living room of a Philadelphia disc jockey named Ron Cutler. And with some help from Phil Charles and a couple of other people, we decided we were going to go freeform rock. So one night, Ron and his wife are in bed talking about call letters, and she very jokingly said to Ron, "Why don't we call it COM?" Ron says, "COM?" And she says, "Yeah, KOME. That's how it all started. I came out here from Philadelphia in December 1970. We put KOME on the air. In February 1971, the very first song was Beginnings by Chicago. I'll let somebody else take it up from there.
Well, yeah, go ahead, Dan.
And Paul, I still have a Philly accent.
Yeah, you got a Philly accent, I know.
You sure do, Gary. We were gonna try and match stuff up to the video, but I don't think that's gonna quite work. You know, you just enjoy the pictures here. We're gonna.
Well, now
that
half the cube is gone, I think I can sort it past. KOME was scheduled to play the band Journey at the San Jose Municipal Stadium. So the game was happening during my shift. So this is before voice tracking. So I had to go in the production studio to take my tracks because the game was I was playing the game. Unfortunately for me, the A&M rep shows up and he takes me out to Los Gatos and he introduces me to a drink called the Long Island Iced Tea. Then he says, "We'll have another one." So I had another one. Then he drove me back to the radio station, went into the production room, and I don't remember anything I put down on tape. So the next day at the Journey game, I refused to listen to the radio because I did not know what I was going to be saying in front of that game.
It's your fault they won, Dana. And they're ringers.
Yeah, we had a fun time with that. You'll see a little bit up there of Neil Sean's up there.
Michael!
All right.
Michael Hunter Harrington. He was our creative, our leader, everybody loved Michael and he inspired us. He had the vision and style and temperament that inspired us to excel. He was inducted into this Hall of Fame in 1990.
No, I think it was 2007.
Anyway, this man encouraged us. He encouraged our good crazy in a great, great way. And he is responsible for the best crazy of KOME over the years.
Well, we have some other pictures. You know, I think. Oh, you know what? I wanted to bring Peter B up here for a sec. He had a message from one of the program directors, the one that got me on the air, Ed Romick.
I'll be brief this time. I owe my move to California to KOME and Ed Romick. And Ed and I are still friends. He wanted to be here today, but he and his wife go on an annual trek and they're somewhere in Utah today. But Ed really established the early rating success of KOME, and many of us owed him the opportunity and the freedom that he gave us. And I referenced that earlier. But it was so much fun to be able to influence the playlist at the music meetings and to be able to put together an hour of music that gave us a great deal of latitude. And Ed asked me to thank the Hall of Fame for honoring KOME, and he wanted to share that with all the great people who worked there at the time he was there and going forward.
Mike here, a little bit. Can we pump this one up a little bit? Okay, you know what? Maybe I should jump into Blazy and Bob. So we have Kevin Pollack there. They had a lot of. They had a great breakfast club, which I talked to Jeff the other day, and he said it was like the highlight of his career was doing those breakfast clubs. And he had famous people on there. I think you saw Jim Carrey and such. And actually, Jeff had a little message here that he wanted to say because he can't be here, and but it's so there it is. So Jeff Blazy says, congratulations to everyone involved with KOME Radio, and thanks to the Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame for including the legendary rock station into the hall.
He's extremely thankful to those who paved the road for this heritage station, allowing him to enjoy one of the greatest successes of his 40-year career. You know, he's still doing a syndicated program and doing very well. And let's see, did you guys want to say something else? Because I got a couple of great stories from the Blasey and Bob era. And I said, who is from the Blasey and Bob era?
Just from the mighty San Jose, KOME 98.5.
I hope you wet your pants.
I'm not sure where we're running right now. Where's the audio? I'm not sure where the audio is from. Okay, so I have a few things from Blasey and Bob, some really cute stories. There's some pictures up here that, there's Carson Daly, that are actually from that era. And one of them was, it's a great picture that Dennis. You can see a great picture, maybe not too clearly, but it's the Doobie Brothers. And so Blasey and Bob have Patrick Simmons on the show. They were having a great time talking. Patrick knew that Jeff Blasey has band, and he goes, hey, why don't you come join us at Shoreline and play with us? So the Blazers got their band together, get on stage with the Doobie Brothers with a choir called the Come Choir, or the KOME Choir, and they did the final couple of songs with them, which was a sold-out show that wrapped up the whole tour for the Doobie Brothers that year. So that was one of his favorite stories. But there's also another one that I think everybody remembers that listened to Blasey and Bob. And how many people are familiar with the WKRP turkey drop? Right? So KOME decided to do one, but it was going to be okay because they were going to have little paper turkeys that will be dropped out of a helicopter, and they rented a space, just a big empty lot. And they had people with rules saying, you know, don't run out there, everybody's going to get a prize, don't worry. So the helicopter comes, and of course all these people run out there, and it's all messed up, and the helicopter flies away. Look, you're not going to be able to do this if you don't behave. So they bring the thing back in, and some more turkeys drop. This time the wind has kicked up, and there's, over a chain link fence, a brand new car dealership. And the turkeys blow all over there. So here's these guys in their big work boots, and they're climbing the fence, and they're landing on the cars. And the turkeys are all over, and people are angry that they're not able to get any of them, and it's going crazy out there. And if you remember the WKRP thing, there's Les Nessman talking away about what a great promotion they're doing, and all of a sudden he realizes there's turkeys dropping, and people are going crazy. This outdid that, because there's Bob Lilly. He's got two microphones. One's a PA, and one is his live mic. He doesn't realize he's on the live mic on air, and he's screaming, "No! No! Go back!" This is all going on the air. So, and the guy, Richard Sanders, who played Les Nessman, is there. And he, of course, said, to top it all off, that the KOME event outdid the WKRP. I've never seen anything like that. So that, I'm sure, was a feather in the Blasey and Bob cap, the worst promotion ever is what they call that. I think, do you guys want to say something about Dennis?
No, let's go to the current video.
Well, okay, well then we'll wrap it up. You guys all know Dennis Erectus, pay some homage there. Marla had to leave because she's on the air over at KQED. And we're going to roll a video now that has stuff to do with the later time when Howard Stern was there. So we're going to roll that.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you live at the Howard Stern book signing on 98.5 KOME.
Hey, everybody.
The helicopter says 13,000 people are here today.
First of all, I got to say something. This station really does kick ass. It's the first time I ever got to hear it. The music is incredibly good. I love this radio station.
I'll tell you the best thing about coming down to see Howard really isn't Howard. We hear him every day on the air. It's the chicks. Right, guys?
Howard Stern, weekday mornings on New Rock 98.5 KOME.
It's Carson here with Radley. Hello. 98.5 KOME. Want to give a quick thank you to some 22,000 Northern Californians who decided that KOME would be a day that they would choose to spend.
I've never quite seen a campsite like this. It's
This
incredible.
is a very, very active camp.
Whoa! You are the ones with the power. Whoa!
Camp KOME!
Almost Acoustic Christmas show is going to be starting in a little bit. Cheryl Crow is doing her sound check right now. I think the keyboard player for the Black Crowes is just moseying about and stuff.
Way down inside, woman, you need it.
With a voice like that, you don't need a band. This ain't no disco. Oh, it ain't no country club either, is it? This is San Jose.
What's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. I'm getting drunk backstage at the Almost Acoustic Christmas show.
We go live to Camp KOME at Shoreline Amphitheater.
Hello, campers! What is up?
It's No Name from KOME. Can you figure that out?
Has a great beat and it's very easy to dance to.
Packed and I'm going, camping, shoreline's jamming. September 13th, we go to camp. And there's over 17 bands for you that you didn't listen to. Sugar Ray, Fiona Apple, Cake and Matchbox 20, Social D, Smash Mouth and Violent Femmes. Camp KOME, it's the camp that's fine. Why can't we be friends?
I gotta hear everybody clapping. Let's go.
Take care, drive safe, all that crap. Take care of yourselves. You guys are great. Good night.
Thanks to Marla Davies for putting that video together.
So, you know, and I think we also should mention some of the people that are our late greats, and that would be from the early days, that Phil Charles, Gary Light did the astrology reports, Don Tosak, Sean Donahue, Captain Rife, Barry the Bear Corkery, Les Tracy, Pat Evans, Scott Elliott, Dan Tapson, Michael Hunter, Ken Cooper, Dennis E. Rectus, Joe O.K. Kelly, and Lori Roberts, and Marilyn Scott. Marilyn is there. People are behind the scenes too. Armin Blable.
Donna, you never mentioned a chicken fly contest.
Oh, I might have just for a second there. We did. So we had we had the turkey drop, but before that, during our era there, we had a chicken fly contest. If you're from the South, you might be familiar with, you set up a mailbox, open on each end, get a chicken, and you plunge it out with a toilet plunger. And so it's a unique to the Bay Area. And we did that thanks to Michael Hunter. Don't remember, I mean, there's so many people that had chickens. You wouldn't believe how many people actually had chickens.
Or how many wanted to plunge them out of a mailbox.
Yeah.
It really sounds horribly cruel. And it kind of went sideways.
It did, because someone got cruel with
But
one of them.
overall, it's, you know, it's a sign of the crazy and mostly really wonderful promotions that we had over the years at KOME. And Michael was certainly instrumental in taking those up another notch.
And I don't
way higher.
Kelly Cox.
Yes,
Getting
my name
it
is
up.
Kelly Cox. I was hired by Michael Hunter Harrington, fired by Pat Evans.
Oh!
But you know, I'm really happy to be here to help remember KOME, and I would say we were kind of pulled in at the last minute to talk about a few things, but one of the really great things about the KOME promotions is some of our promotions were actually for the record company guys, like Kenny Ruther, who is here today. And, you know, we had a wine tasting tour in the Napa Valley. We had a cruise on San Francisco Bay.
We did not get kicked out of the cruise, but we did get kicked out of at least one
they weren't
wine.
going to throw us overboard. But We had fantastic promotions that drew in our listeners and drew in our partners in the music business, such as the record guys, as I always call them. And it was one of the finer things about KOME to feel like you're really part of a big team and doing it as a team effort. So I'm
We're
proud to
still
have been a part.
tight. We are still tight today. Ma'am, I'm wrapped up here. Thank you for being here. I wish I could do it better so I could give you information, but I'm really missing. Thank you for being here.
All right. Jonah, thank you, our legendary station, KOME. And that concludes our first live Bay Area Radio Hall of Fame induction ceremony in 2 years. We made up for lost time, I think. Final round of applause, please, for all of our new members. I say stay safe, get your booster shot, and I hand things back over to Peter Cleveland.
Thank you, Stan. All right, well, we made it through, and it's not even 5 o'clock. Take 280 home. Thank everybody that had anything to do with this program today, especially our elected executive producer, Carol Compton, our Nancy Jr., Bill Williams, Bob Brown. Thank you for joining us.
We go live to Camp KOME at Shoreline Amphitheater.
Hello, campers! What is up? It's No Name from KOME. Can you figure that out?
Has a great beat and it's very easy to dance to.
Back then I'm going camping, shorelines jamming. September 13th we go to camp. And there's over 17 bands for you that you didn't listen to. Sugar Ray, Fiona Apple, Gig and Matchbox 20, Social D, Smash Mouth and Violent Femmes. Camp KOME, it's the camp that's fun.
Why can't we be friends? I gotta hear everybody clapping. Let's go.
Take care, drive safe, all that crap.